Success guilt is a quiet but crushing form of mental sabotage that hides beneath your accomplishments, whispering that you don't deserve what you've earned. It shows up in subtle ways, downplaying your wins, feeling uneasy when you outperform loved ones, or sabotaging yourself just as things are finally going right. On the surface, it might look like humility, but underneath is a deep sense of emotional conflict, where success brings not only joy, but shame, fear, and self-doubt. Success guilt. This guilt often stems from early beliefs that were never questioned. Maybe you were taught that money corrupts, or that ambition is selfish. Maybe you grew up in a family that struggled financially, and now, every time you succeed, it feels like a betrayal. You carry the invisible weight of where you came from, and some part of you feels guilty for rising above it. The mind plays tricks. You start to think your achievements came too easily, or that someone else deserved them more. You may avoid celebrating milestones because you're afraid others will feel left behind, or worse, stop loving you. You subconsciously shrink, stall, or procrastinate, not because you lack drive, but because succeeding means stepping into a version of yourself that threatens your old identity, your relationships, and even your own sense of belonging. Success guilt often leads people to give away too much, apologize for taking up space, or keep themselves at the edge of burnout to earn their place. Deep down, you may feel that if others are suffering, you have no right to feel joy or abundance. You trade your peace of mind for the illusion of fairness, trying to balance the emotional scales of a world that never asked you to. This sabotage is dangerous not because it stops you cold, but because it slows you just enough to dull your edge, enough to keep you small. It eats away at self-worth until you confuse guilt for gratitude and settle for a fraction of the life you could live. You don't recognize the prison because it looks like empathy, but what it really is fear disguised as compassion, fear of being seen. The fear of being seen isn't about physical visibility. It's about emotional exposure. It's the deep, often unconscious terror that if people truly saw you, your thoughts, your power, your desires, they would reject you, mock you, or worse, abandon you. It hides behind perfectionism, self-deprecation, and chronic invisibility. You play small, not because you lack talent or ambition, but because some part of you believes that stepping into full visibility will cost you love, safety, or belonging. This fear is rooted in early experiences where authenticity was punished. Maybe your boldness was labeled too much, or your vulnerability was met with shame. So you learn to edit yourself, to say what's acceptable, to do what's safe, and to only show the parts of you that wouldn't be judged. Over time, this becomes a mask so well crafted that even you forget what's underneath. You stop speaking up in meetings even when you have the answer. You over-prepare to the point of paralysis, convinced you must be flawless to be allowed to shine. You hide behind roles, credentials, filters, and jokes. You let others go first. You let others go louder. You live in the shadows of your own potential, not because it's comfortable, but because the spotlight feels like danger, not validation. Being truly seen means risking exposure, your flaws, your hopes, your hunger. It means letting go of control and accepting that some people might misunderstand you, envy you, or even attack you. That's the cost. But in avoiding it, you pay a deeper price, disconnection from your own aliveness. The fear of being seen convinces you to dilute your light just enough to stay liked. But liked is not the same as loved. Liked is not the same as respected. And liked is never worth the cost of your voice, your presence, your power. This sabotage is sneaky. It dresses itself up as humility, as being a team player, as being low maintenance. But inside, it's fear. Fear of judgment, fear of success, fear of being known too deeply and then discarded. So you keep parts of yourself locked away, waiting for a world that feels safe enough to show up in. And in that waiting, you disappear. Toxic humility. Toxic humility is a slow erosion of self-worth disguised as virtue. It teaches you to dim your light, deflect praise, and understate your value, believing that playing small is the same as being kind, good, or grounded. On the outside, it looks like modesty. On the inside, it's a quiet war against your own importance. You don't just avoid arrogance, you fear confidence. You treat your achievements like accidents, your gifts like coincidences, and your impact like it's no big deal. Somewhere along the way, you were taught that standing tall would make others feel small, that pride is poison, that owning your greatness is a sign of ego. So you learn to downplay, to step aside, to apologize when you shine too brightly. You give credit to everyone but yourself. You wait for others to validate you before you dare to believe in your own worth. Toxic humility makes you uncomfortable in moments of recognition. Compliments stick to your skin like guilt. You shift the spotlight to others as fast as you can, not out of generosity, but from a gnawing discomfort that you don't deserve it. You say things like, "I just got lucky," or "anyone could have done it," even though you know that's not true, and the world listens. It takes your silence as agreement, your softness as a lack of strength, your reluctance to claim space as proof that you don't need it. Over time, this becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. You get passed over, undervalued, forgotten, not because you lack brilliance, but because you keep hiding it under the illusion of humility. You start resenting others who self-promote, who speak boldly, who take up space, but secretly, you envy their freedom. You tell yourself you're being realistic, grateful, humble, but what you're really doing is trying to be invisible enough to never be judged. Toxic humility is not humility at all. It is fear. Fear of seeming arrogant, fear of being envied, fear of being exposed as someone who wants more. So you shrink, you underplay, you overgive, you teach the world to see you as less than what you are, and eventually you start believing it too. Imposter loyalty. Imposter loyalty is the act of dimming your light to protect the comfort of others. It's the subtle, self-imposed sabotage where you choose to stay small, not because you believe you're incapable, but because you fear what your growth might do to the people around you. This is not imposter syndrome in the traditional sense. You don't feel like a fraud because you lack ability. You feel like a traitor for rising when others haven't. It creeps in when your success begins to outpace that of your friends, your family, or your community. When you start to break generational patterns, earn more than your parents ever dreamed of, or step into a life that feels light years away from where you began, somewhere inside a voice whispers, "Who do you think you are to go further?" You start questioning not your talent, but your loyalty. So you hold back. You don't share your achievements. You lower your prices. You pass on opportunities. You laugh off compliments. You say no to the spotlight because you don't want anyone else to feel like they're falling behind. You stay relatable by staying stuck, not because you aren't ready to grow, but because you don't want to outgrow the people you love. Imposter loyalty is emotionally heavy. It binds your self-worth to the comfort of others. You believe that if you become too successful, you'll make others feel less than, that if you shine too brightly, you'll create distance, that your rise will come at the cost of connection, and so you protect their egos by suffocating your own evolution. The tragedy is that this sacrifice is invisible. No one sees the moments you said less than you meant or asked for less than you needed. No one praises you for the dreams you quietly put on hold. There's no reward for shrinking, just a slow-burning resentment that lives beneath the mask of loyalty. And worst of all, it convinces you that self-abandonment is love, that to honor others, you must betray yourself, that staying behind is noble, that holding back is kind. But deep down, you know, it's not loyalty, it's fear dressed as devotion. Deservedness doubt. Deservedness doubt is the aching belief that no matter how much you achieve, it was never really yours to claim. It's not just insecurity, it's a deeply rooted conviction that you must constantly prove, earn, and justify your right to receive anything good, love, success, rest, recognition. All of it feels like a gift you're secretly unworthy of, and at any moment, someone might come to take it all away. This doubt lives in the silent spaces after every win. The job offer you question if you really earned, the compliment you deflect with a joke, the rest day that feels like laziness. You measure your worth by how hard you work, how much you sacrifice, how little you need, and if something comes too easily, you question whether you deserve it at all. You hold yourself to impossible standards because anything less feels like cheating. You don't celebrate progress, only perfection. You don't trust joy. You brace for the fall. You keep running, pushing, performing, not because you're driven, but because you're afraid to stop and face the fear that maybe, just maybe, you're still not enough. This sabotage often starts in childhood, where love was conditional, given when you behaved, when you achieved, when you pleased. Somewhere along the way, you learn that effort equals worth, that ease is dangerous, that receiving without struggle is selfish or shameful. So you made a vow, often unspoken, I will never take more than I've earned, and then you made earning everything. Deservedness doubt poisons the present with the anxiety of debt. You feel like you owe the world for every ounce of goodness that comes your way. You stay in toxic relationships because part of you thinks it's the best you'll get. You overgive, over-apologize, over-explain. You hustle for worthiness in rooms where you already belong. But the world doesn't reward self-punishment. No one hands out medals for withholding joy. Still, you believe that if you keep proving yourself, one more achievement, one more sacrifice, you'll finally feel worthy. But that moment never comes, because it was never about what you had. It was about what you believed you were allowed to have, and in your mind, you never quite earned enough to simply receive. Perfection paralysis. Perfection paralysis is the haunting belief that if it's not flawless, it's not worth doing. It's the mental chokehold that keeps you endlessly planning, tweaking, and second-guessing, while life silently passes you by. You convince yourself you're just not ready yet, but what you're really doing is hiding behind the illusion of control. You don't delay because you're lazy. You delay because you're terrified of being judged for anything less than perfect. At its core, perfection paralysis is fear. Fear of criticism, fear of failure, fear of being exposed as ordinary. You hold back that post, that project, that conversation, not because it isn't good enough, but because you think you aren't. You fear putting something out into the world that could be misunderstood, rejected, or worse, ignored. So instead of risking vulnerability, you chase flawless. And in that chase, nothing ever feels done. Nothing ever feels safe enough to share. You tinker, you delay, you obsess over tiny details while avoiding the bold move that actually matters. You disguise your fear as standards. You call your hesitation being thorough. You call your avoidance refining. But beneath every excuse is the aching truth. You're afraid that doing your best still won't be enough. Perfection paralysis is lonely. While others move forward, imperfect, messy, human, you stay frozen. And the world doesn't wait. Someone else launches the idea. Someone else applies for the job. Someone else steps onto the stage you were meant to stand on. You watch it all, telling yourself your moment will come once it's just right. But perfection is a finish line that keeps moving. What you don't realize is that your rough draft could change someone's life. Your imperfect story could make someone feel seen. Your half-formed idea could open doors, but you never give it the chance because somewhere along the way, you learned that mistakes meant shame, that flaws meant weakness, that done wrong was worse than not done at all. So you wait, you polish, you prepare, you let time drain your momentum until even your inspiration begins to rot. Not because you lack genius, but because your genius is shackled by a lie, that if it's not perfect, it's not allowed to exist. Punishing progress. Punishing progress is the hidden habit of turning your own growth into a reason to suffer. It's when you finally make a breakthrough, reach a goal, overcome a block, heal a wound, And instead of feeling proud or at peace, you feel guilt, pressure, or even self-rejection. You move forward and then punish yourself for how long it took, how messy the process was, or how others might perceive your success. The moment of progress becomes a trigger, not a triumph. You tell yourself it wasn't fast enough. You downplay it because someone else did it better. You hit a milestone and immediately raise the bar higher, not out of ambition, but out of punishment, as if joy is indulgent, as if rest is betrayal, as if self-compassion would somehow erase all the pain that came before it. You push harder when you should be celebrating. You critique the journey instead of honoring how far you've come. You replay the missteps, the failures, the wasted time. You shame yourself for not healing faster, for not knowing sooner, for not being perfect while growing. Your progress becomes a weapon you use against yourself, a reminder of how you should have done more, been better, gotten there earlier. And the world doesn't help. We're taught to glorify struggle and hustle, to see progress only as a checkpoint before the next climb. But when you internalize that mindset, you stop allowing yourself to feel proud. You don't give yourself permission to feel whole, even for a moment. Instead, you tie your worth to constant motion. Forward is never far enough. Healed is never whole enough. Success is never safe enough. You punish yourself by overworking after a win, by minimizing the impact of your own growth, by withdrawing from the people who cheer for you. Because deep down, some part of you still believes you don't deserve ease, that you have to pay for peace, that every step forward requires a price. So you rob yourself of the very thing you worked for, not because you didn't make it, but because you don't know how to receive it without hurting yourself in the process. Crisis addiction. Crisis addiction is the unconscious craving for chaos, urgency, and emotional extremes, where life only feels meaningful when something is on fire. You may not realize it, but part of you is more comfortable in survival mode than in peace. You're driven not by goals, but by emergencies. You say you want calm, but when things finally settle, you feel restless, aimless, even empty. This sabotage doesn't always look dramatic from the outside. It can look like overcommitting to impossible deadlines, waiting until the last second to act, or constantly jumping from one problem to the next. You attract chaos or create it because the stillness of stability feels unbearable. The truth is, peace feels foreign because it doesn't match your nervous system's default setting. You've learned to equate stress with purpose, struggle with value, pain with proof that you're doing enough. Somewhere in your past, being in crisis was when you felt most needed, most alive, most validated. Maybe your worth was tied to fixing things for others. Maybe you only got attention when things were falling apart. Over time, you began to associate chaos with connection. Calm became isolation. Safety became boredom. Joy became suspicious. So you unconsciously chase urgency. You create impossible expectations, ignite emotional fires, or take on burdens that were never yours to carry. You confuse adrenaline with aliveness. You build your identity around being the one who always shows up when everything's crashing down. But deep down, you're exhausted. You're constantly bracing for the next hit, the next problem, the next breakdown, because a part of you doesn't know how to function without one. And when peace does arrive, you sabotage it. You pick a fight. You start a new project. You worry about things that haven't happened yet. You can't breathe in ease because you've learned to only breathe in chaos. Quiet feels like a threat. Stability feels like a trap. Crisis addiction convinces you that struggle is your natural state, that being in control means always being in motion, always solving, always running. But the harshest truth is this: you're not addicted to chaos because it feels good. You're addicted to it because somewhere deep inside, you don't believe you're worthy of life without it. Micro-sabotage. Micro-sabotage is the art of slowly unraveling your own progress, not with grand, obvious mistakes, but with quiet, everyday betrayals of your potential. It's skipping the call, ignoring the email, snoozing the alarm just one more time. It's telling yourself you'll do it tomorrow, that you're not ready yet, that it doesn't really matter. Each choice is tiny, harmless even, but over time, these moments pile up like invisible bricks, building a wall between you and the life you say you want. Micro-sabotage is not laziness. It's fear wearing the mask of later. It's perfectionism disguised as preparation. It's low self-worth dressed up as humility. You don't destroy your momentum in one dramatic fall. You drain it drop by drop, decision by decision, excuse by excuse. And the worst part? You usually know you're doing it. You feel the tension every time you delay the action that could change everything. You feel the weight of avoidance grow heavier with each small task you dodge. You watch yourself repeat the same patterns over and over again, hoping for a different result while pretending these small slips aren't sabotaging your path. But they are. Every skipped step becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. See, I knew I couldn't keep this up. Of course it didn't work. Something always gets in the way. What's really happening is you're protecting yourself from visibility, from disappointment, from responsibility. Because what if it does work? What if people start expecting more from you? What if you finally step into the version of yourself that no longer has excuses? That's terrifying. So instead, you chip away at your own edge, just enough to stay in motion, but never enough to arrive. Micro-sabotage is seductive because it feels safe. It lets you feel almost productive. It gives you the illusion of control. But it is slow poison, and the cost isn't just lost time. It's lost trust in yourself. Every undone promise erodes your belief that you follow through, until one day your dreams feel like lies you keep repeating, not because you don't want them, but because you keep getting in your own way, one quiet choice at a time. False readiness syndrome. False readiness syndrome is the mental trap of endless preparation, a seductive form of self-sabotage where you convince yourself that you're just one more course, one more book, or one more strategy away from being ready. You tell yourself you're being responsible, that you're just getting all your ducks in a row, but what you're really doing is hiding, stalling, living in the safety of planning so you never have to face the fear of actually beginning. This isn't laziness, it's fear dressed up as discipline. You research, rehearse, reorganize. You rewrite your vision a dozen times. You tweak the website, reread your notes, draft endless outlines. You keep preparing for a moment that never arrives, because deep down, you've convinced yourself that if you're not 100% bulletproof, you're not allowed to start. You measure readiness like a finish line, but readiness isn't a milestone, it's a myth. No matter how much you learn, you will never feel ready enough to outrun fear, and so you become addicted to learning as a way to delay doing. Growth becomes a smokescreen for avoidance. Your ambition turns into a prison made of perfect blueprints and untested brilliance. False readiness is especially cruel because it feels productive. You look busy, you sound wise, people applaud your dedication, but inside, there's a quiet ache because you know you're meant for more, and still, you hesitate. You watch others launch with half your skill and double your courage, and you call them reckless while secretly envying their freedom. This syndrome feeds on self-doubt. You question your voice, your timing, your worth. You believe you need more certifications, more clarity, more confidence, but no level of preparation will ever replace the lessons that only come from showing up, messing up, and moving through it anyway. And perhaps the most painful part, the longer you wait, the heavier it becomes to start. The weight of unused potential begins to rot inside you, and eventually you start to mistake not ready for not capable. But the truth is, you were never supposed to feel ready. You were supposed to be brave enough to begin before you did. Delayed permission seeking. Delayed permission seeking is the silent thief of momentum. the habit of waiting for someone else to tell you it's okay to move, speak, create, or become. It's the inner voice that whispers, "Not yet," no matter how ready you are. You convince yourself that you need more validation, more experience, more approval before you act. You don't say no, and you don't say yes. You wait, and in that waiting, your life stalls. It often begins innocently. A teacher who only praised you when you raised your hand, a parent who expected perfection before permission, a society that told you to stay in line, wait your turn, be chosen. So now, even as an adult, you hesitate. You overthink every decision, seeking signs or asking for feedback you don't really need. You ask questions you already know the answers to. You ask people for opinions on dreams they don't understand. And if they hesitate, even slightly, you take it as proof that you're not ready. You dream with the brakes on. You create drafts that never get published. You rehearse conversations that never happen. You fantasize about possibilities you're too afraid to approve for yourself, not because you lack ability, but because deep down, you still think someone else has the authority to grant you access to your own potential. This sabotage doesn't scream, it whispers. It hides behind phrases like, "I just want to be sure," or "I'm being responsible," or "I'm waiting for the right time." But what you're really waiting for is permission to believe in yourself without someone else's blessing. And it's heartbreaking, because the world will rarely give you that. There is no judge in the sky handing out green lights. Most people are too focused on their own fears to tell you to chase your boldest vision. So you stay paused, half awake in your own life, because no one looked you in the eye and said, "Yes, you can." But they don't have to. That was never their job. It was yours. Delayed permission seeking is the internalized belief that your power isn't real until someone else sees it. But the truth is, it becomes real the moment you do. And until then, every delay is self-rejection dressed as patience. Fear of replacing a mentor. The fear of replacing a mentor is a quiet, gut-wrenching form of internal sabotage that few talk about, but it can silently derail your growth when you need it most. It's the hidden guilt and hesitation that creeps in when you begin to surpass the very people who once guided you, inspired you, or helped you rise. You don't hold back because you lack ability. You hold back because moving forward feels like betrayal. At some point, you were led, protected, or believed in by someone you admired. A teacher, a coach, a boss, a parent, someone who saw something in you before you could see it in yourself. Their wisdom lit your path. Their approval gave you courage. But now, as your talent matures and your vision expands, you're faced with an uncomfortable truth. To grow fully, you might have to eclipse them, and the shame of that possibility is paralyzing. You start shrinking your ideas to stay relatable. You delay success to protect their ego. You filter your wins to avoid making them feel left behind. You keep returning to them for validation, not because you need it, but because letting go of their approval feels like cutting a lifeline to who you once were. You fear they might resent you, or worse, that they'll no longer see you as theirs. This fear isn't just about loyalty, it's about identity. Your mentor may have become part of how you define yourself. Surpassing them feels like rewriting the very story of your worth. You ask yourself questions you're ashamed to admit. What if they feel threatened? What if I outgrow their advice? What if I no longer need them? But even more terrifying, what if they stop loving me when I do? So you stay in a loop, eternally grateful, perpetually limited. You call it respect, but deep down, it's fear. You're afraid that your evolution might cast a shadow on someone who once helped you shine, but in protecting them, you abandon yourself. The hardest part isn't moving forward. It's letting go of the belief that honoring your mentor means staying behind. Growth is not betrayal, but when you fear replacing the person who once held the door open, you never walk through it. Subconscious identity. Clashing. Subconscious identity clashing is the inner war between who you're becoming and who you've always believed you were allowed to be. It's the quiet conflict that arises when growth threatens to break the emotional contracts you've built with your past, contracts rooted in survival, belonging, and familiarity. You start to evolve, you stretch toward more, but deep underneath, something starts to pull you back, not because you don't want the new life, but because it contradicts the old self you still feel loyal to. You tell yourself you want confidence, abundance, visibility, but those desires crash into hidden identities: the quiet one, the broke one, the helper, the background character, the black sheep. And as you grow, those older versions don't just disappear, they resist, because part of you still believes that stepping out of that role means betrayal, betrayal of your story, betrayal of your family, betrayal of who you were when no one believed in you. So you stall. You take one step forward, then retreat. You overachieve and then sabotage. You shine and then shut down, not because you're confused, but because your identity has not caught up with your ambition. One part of you is building, while the other is terrified of losing everything that felt safe, even if that safety was suffocating. This clash is rarely loud. It hides in hesitation, in procrastination, in that sick feeling of success that doesn't feel like joy, but grief. You mourn the version of you who struggled. You mourn the identity that earned sympathy, connection, and familiarity. And now, without realizing it, you feel guilty for outgrowing your pain. Subconscious identity clashing convinces you that transformation means abandonment, that stepping into power means losing your roots, that joy means separation. So you unconsciously begin to dim, to delay, to destroy what you're building, not because you're weak, but because you're still at war with who you're not ready to let go of. And until that identity is confronted, not with shame but with compassion, it will keep dragging you backward, reminding you who you were, until you're brave enough to redefine who you're allowed to be. Internal classism. Internal classism is the deeply rooted, often invisible belief that you don't belong in rooms with wealth, power, or status, not because anyone told you directly, but because some part of you learned that people like you don't get to live that kind of life. It's a psychological cage built not from outside rejection, but from the quiet voice inside that whispers, "You're out of your league. Don't forget where you came from." This sabotage runs deeper than insecurity. It's about identity. If you grew up around struggle, survival, or scarcity, then success doesn't just feel foreign, it feels dangerous. Your nervous system is trained for hardship. Comfort feels suspicious. Wealth feels like a costume you're borrowing, and you're always waiting to be found out. You might step into higher spaces, better jobs, nicer neighborhoods, luxury experiences, but inside, you still feel like an imposter pretending to fit in. So, you overcompensate. You over-apologize. You play the humble hustler role so well that you never allow yourself to fully arrive. You don't negotiate the raise. You water down your pricing. You say things like, "I'm not doing this for the money," even though you desperately need and deserve more. You stay loyal to environments that no longer serve you because you feel guilty for outgrowing them. Internal classism makes you judge yourself by where you started instead of where you're going. You secretly question your right to ease, to luxury, to freedom. You sabotage opportunities because success feels like betrayal to your roots, your culture, your people. You fear becoming one of them, so you cling to the struggle like a badge of authenticity. And the worst part, you start policing yourself. You mock your own ambition before anyone else can. You dress down your wins. You dim your shine so others don't feel uncomfortable. You keep proving you're still grounded, still relatable, still the same. But you're not. You've changed, and it terrifies you. Internal classism doesn't want you to feel rich. It wants you to feel guilty. It wants you to believe that abundance is for other people and survival is where you belong. And until you confront it, you'll keep choosing scraps over seats at the table you were meant to claim. False modesty reflex. False modesty reflex is the automatic, almost compulsive need to downplay yourself the moment someone sees your brilliance. It's a knee-jerk response that turns every compliment into discomfort, every win into an apology, every opportunity into a chance to shrink. You deflect praise with nervous laughter. You immediately list who helped you, why it wasn't a big deal, or how lucky you were. It's not humility, it's fear wearing humility's mask. You've trained yourself to soften every sharp edge of your greatness, to wrap your power in disclaimers so it doesn't feel too much. And maybe, once upon a time, that kept you safe. Maybe it made you likable, digestible, invisible enough to avoid envy or judgment. But now it keeps you stuck, because the more you disown your gifts, the more you disconnect from them. You're not just avoiding arrogance, you're avoiding ownership. False modesty tells you you'll be punished for pride, that people will resent you if you speak confidently, that success should whisper, not roar, so you become fluent in self-diminishment. You say things like, "Oh, it's nothing," even when it's everything. You call your art a little thing I've been working on. You respond to admiration with discomfort, because somewhere deep down, being seen feels like danger. This reflex robs you of credibility, magnetism, and momentum. People sense your hesitance and start to mirror it. Opportunities don't land because you signal, without words, that you're not ready. You start to wonder why others get chosen, why your work goes unnoticed, why your light doesn't feel like it's shining. But it's not the world dimming you. It's you flicking the switch every time it gets too bright. False modesty isn't just self-sabotage, it's self-erasure, a learned behavior that teaches you to hide the very things that could set you free. You think you're being humble, but you're actually telling the world not to take you seriously, and eventually it listens. Because when you keep shrinking your worth to fit the comfort of others, you'll wake up one day wondering why no one sees you, when all along you were the one disappearing. Habitual hedging is the subtle, chronic habit of softening your truth before it ever leaves your lips. It's the reflex to cushion your words with disclaimers, to dilute your ideas before they're challenged, to leave yourself a back door in case you're wrong. It's not just about playing it safe, it's about never fully standing behind yourself. You hedge your voice, your value, your vision, just enough that no one can really attack you, but also just enough that no one can fully see you either. It starts innocently. You say things like, "I might be wrong, but," or "This is probably a stupid idea," or "I don't know if this makes sense, but." You phrase your statements as questions. You laugh off your opinions. You wrap insight in a layer of doubt so it doesn't come off as bold. You think you're being humble, but what you're really doing is pre-rejecting yourself so others don't have to. Somewhere along the way, you learn that certainty was dangerous, that being sure of yourself invites criticism, that conviction makes you a target, so you flinch first. You edit yourself in real time, not because you lack clarity, but because you're afraid of what clarity demands: confidence, risk, exposure. You believe that if you speak carefully enough, no one will ever misunderstand you, but in the process, no one ever really knows you either. Habitual hedging doesn't just weaken your communication, it erodes your self-trust. You start doubting whether your opinions are valid unless someone else confirms them. You begin to second-guess decisions you already made. You hesitate when life needs you to move. You convince yourself that your voice is only valuable if it's perfectly phrased, perfectly timed, perfectly safe, and it's exhausting. You replay conversations. You rehearse everything in your head. You carry the weight of words unsaid and points unmade, not because you didn't have them, but because you didn't feel worthy of saying them without a buffer. Habitual hedging is self-protection at the cost of power. You think you're being careful, considerate, strategic, but really, you're slowly training the world to doubt you because you keep showing them how much you doubt yourself. Overresourcing as delay tactic. Overresourcing as a delay tactic is the seductive illusion that you're preparing, when really you're procrastinating with purpose. It looks responsible, it feels productive, you're gathering more tools, watching another tutorial, signing up for another course, reading another book, telling yourself you're getting ready. But underneath it all, you're stalling, not because you need more information, but because action feels terrifying. You convince yourself that one more strategy, one more template, one more expert opinion will finally make you feel ready. But readiness never comes. Instead, your progress gets buried beneath a mountain of PDFs, webinars, highlight reels, and half-finished plans. You stay stuck in the realm of theory, afraid to touch the reality where you might fail, or worse, succeed and have to own it. The truth is, over-resourcing is safe. It keeps you in the learner role, not the leader. It gives you something to do that feels like momentum while protecting you from the risk of exposure, rejection, or transformation. Because starting means you can be seen, and being seen means you can be judged. You hide behind preparation so you don't have to deal with the fear of being underqualified, criticized, or not good enough. But deep down, you already know what to do. You've read the books. You've taken the notes. The problem isn't knowledge, it's permission. And instead of giving it to yourself, you outsource it to resources, hoping that confidence will be delivered through another download. This delay tactic is especially dangerous because it feels noble. You're being thorough, professional, wise, but what you're really doing is avoiding responsibility for your own power. You don't need more tools. You need to trust yourself with the ones you already have. And the longer you wait, the heavier the knowledge becomes. It turns into guilt, into resentment, into a quiet sense of failure wrapped in busyness. Because some part of you knows this isn't learning anymore, it's hiding. You're not collecting resources to build something, you're collecting them to protect yourself from becoming it. Emotional hoarding. Emotional hoarding is the silent habit of collecting pain, slights, regrets, and betrayals, storing them deep within you like artifacts of every time you were wronged, abandoned, or unseen. It's not dramatic, it's not loud. It's subtle, private, and often invisible to everyone around you. But inside, it feels like a cluttered attic of unresolved emotions you can't let go of, not because you want to hold on to them, but because you're terrified of what it would mean to release them. You carry old wounds like proof that your guard is necessary, that your pain is justified, that your coldness, distance, or distrust isn't bitterness, it's memory. And every time someone gets too close, you reach for those emotional relics to remind yourself, this is why I can't risk it. You've convinced yourself that letting go means being vulnerable again, that forgiving means forgetting, that healing means erasing the evidence of what you survived. So you keep everything, the text you never responded to, the apology that never came, the betrayal you replay in your mind like a favorite movie scene. You think that if you hold on to it long enough, it'll make sense, that it'll protect you from making the same mistake, that the pain, if preserved, will eventually serve a purpose, but instead, it builds, quietly, heavily, until even joy feels like something you have to earn through suffering. Emotional hoarding doesn't just live in your mind, it seeps into your body. You become tense without knowing why, exhausted even when you've done nothing. You hold your breath during good moments, waiting for them to end. You struggle to connect, to trust, to fully feel anything new, because the old still takes up all the space. You tell yourself you're being strong, that you've moved on, but nothing has actually left you. It's just buried under layers of silence, sarcasm, or emotional numbness. You don't let anyone help you unpack it because you don't believe anyone could understand the weight of what you've kept hidden for so long. And deep down, you fear that if you finally put it down, there'll be nothing left holding you together. So instead, you carry everything alone, just in case. Self-disqualification bias. Self-disqualification bias is the silent, persistent belief that you're never the right person for the opportunity in front of you. It's the reflexive no you whisper to yourself before anyone else has the chance to say it. You disqualify yourself from jobs you're qualified for, relationships you're worthy of, rooms you belong in, because you've already decided you don't measure up. This bias doesn't shout. It shows up in quiet withdrawals. You don't apply. You don't raise your hand. You don't speak your truth. Not because you don't care, but because you've convinced yourself it would be foolish to even try. You imagine the rejection before it happens. You assume the worst-case scenario as a form of protection, so you eliminate yourself before the world gets the chance to. What's dangerous is how logical it feels. You tell yourself you're being realistic, responsible, grounded. You say things like, they probably want someone with more experience, or I'm not ready yet, or there's someone better out there. But the truth is, you're not actually measuring fit. You're measuring your own fear of inadequacy. You mistake insecurity for intuition. Self-disqualification bias often begins with early experiences where trying led to embarrassment or where your worth was constantly questioned. Maybe you were told not to get your hopes up. Maybe you saw others get rejected and learned it was safer not to reach at all. Over time, it becomes your normal, this constant filtering out of your own name from the list of possibilities. The tragedy is that you never get to find out what could have happened, not because you weren't capable, but because you decided you weren't eligible. The dream doesn't die, it just never gets a chance to breathe. And every time you disqualify yourself, it chips away at your belief that you're someone who belongs in the life you want. You become the gatekeeper of your own limitations, guarding a door that was never locked. And the most painful part? You start to believe that the opportunities passing you by were never meant for you, when in truth, you were the one who quietly walked away from them, again and again, without ever being asked to. Boundary guilt. Boundary guilt is the deep, aching discomfort that rises when you finally say no, and then immediately question if you were selfish for doing it. It's the emotional backlash that follows any attempt to protect your time, your peace, your energy. You know you need boundaries, you crave them, but when you actually enforce one, it feels like you've committed a crime against someone's expectations. It begins with a simple line, declining an invitation, asking for space, refusing to be overextended. But instead of relief, you're flooded with doubt. What if they think I don't care? What if they get mad? What if they never ask again? So many people pleasers are built not from kindness, but from a lifelong fear that setting limits means losing love, that protecting yourself means hurting someone else, and that makes boundaries feel less like self-respect and more like betrayal. This guilt doesn't just hurt, it controls. It makes you rewrite your messages 10 times to sound softer. It makes you over-explain your no with long justifications. It makes you backpedal, apologize, overcompensate. You bend and bend until you're emotionally contorted, trying to make others comfortable while you're silently unraveling inside. And yet, the people who are healthiest, happiest, and most respected aren't those who say yes to everything. They're the ones who honor their limits without apology. But when you've been conditioned to believe that your value is tied to your availability, boundaries feel like rejection, not just of others, but of your own identity as the reliable one, the helper, the easygoing one. Boundary guilt is especially painful because it targets your worth. It makes you feel like a bad friend, partner, co-worker, like you're letting everyone down. But the truth is, the only thing you're letting down is the unsustainable version of yourself that was built around self-abandonment. What boundary guilt really reveals is how deeply you've been trained to prioritize others over yourself. It shows you where love was once conditional, where being good meant being agreeable, and where saying no now feels dangerous because once it actually was. So you say yes with a smile and a clenched jaw, not because you want to, but because the weight of your own permission still feels too heavy to hold. punishing yourself with overpreparation. Punishing yourself with overpreparation is the hidden self-torture that masquerades as discipline. It's not about being thorough. It's about making yourself earn the right to show up. You study, rehearse, tweak, and obsess, not because you need to, but because you feel like you have to in order to be worthy. It's perfectionism turned inward, a quiet form of self-harm dressed up as hard work. You don't prepare to feel ready. You prepare to feel allowed, allowed to speak, allowed to start, allowed to succeed. Every step forward is held hostage until you've suffered enough. You convince yourself that if you just know everything, then maybe you won't be criticized. Maybe you'll be safe. So you drown yourself in research, revise until your eyes burn, rehearse your words until they sound robotic. And even then, you still feel like it's not enough. There's a difference between preparation and punishment, and you know when you've crossed the line. You feel it in the exhaustion that hits before anything even begins. You feel it in the shame that creeps in the second you pause. You start to believe that if it comes easily, you didn't work hard enough, that if others don't see the strain, they won't believe in your skill. Somewhere deep inside, you've attached value to struggle. You believe ease is suspicious, that being prepared isn't just helpful, it's required to deserve the opportunity. And if you don't over-prepare, you feel guilty, lazy, fraudulent. So you whip yourself into readiness over and over again, not realizing you've turned preparation into a form of self-erasure. You become your own taskmaster, demanding more and more from yourself before letting yourself take the smallest step forward. And each time, the bar gets higher. Each time, your trust in your natural ability shrinks, until one day, you can't tell where the work ends and the punishment begins. This isn't about excellence, it's about fear. The fear of not being good enough unless you bleed for it. The fear that if you're not perfect, you'll be punished by the world. So you punish yourself first, just to beat them to it. Destruction after a win. Destruction after a win is the self-inflicted chaos that follows right after success. It's the emotional unraveling that kicks in. The moment things finally go right, you finish the project, you land the job, you hit the goal, and instead of basking in it, celebrating it, owning it, you panic, you sabotage, you tear down the very thing you built, not because you want to fail, but because part of you is terrified of what success actually means. This sabotage is brutal because it feels so illogical. You've worked so hard, pushed so long, dreamed so vividly, only to find that the moment you arrive, something inside you doesn't feel safe. You pick a fight, you ghost opportunities, you numb out, you create a mess to fix, a problem to solve, a fire to put out, anything to distract you from the stillness of accomplishment. That stillness, it's foreign. You've trained yourself to thrive in struggle, to operate in survival, to need the chase. Winning was supposed to feel like peace, but instead, it feels like exposure, like now everyone's watching, like now you have something to lose, and that pressure becomes unbearable. So you unconsciously return to the version of yourself that feels more familiar, the one who's working hard to get somewhere, not the one who's already there. You downplay the win. You tell yourself it wasn't that big of a deal. You find flaws in your performance, reasons it doesn't count, excuses for why it won't last. You break the high before anyone else can take it from you. Destruction after a win often comes from a belief buried so deep you don't even hear it. I don't deserve this. And when that belief goes unchallenged, success becomes emotionally unsafe. You cling to dysfunction because it makes sense. Struggle feels like home. Achievement feels like trespassing. And so you burn it down, not all at once, but in little ways. Missed deadlines, overcommitment, impulsive decisions, self-neglect. The win becomes a threat instead of a foundation. And the cruel irony? You start the climb all over again, not because you failed, but because you couldn't stand the weight of finally succeeding. Rejection rehearsal. Rejection rehearsal is the cruel ritual of imagining every possible way someone might say no to you before they ever get the chance. It's the emotional rehearsal of failure, criticism, abandonment, or humiliation. You run the scenes over and over in your mind. The job interview that goes cold, the message left on read, the pitch that gets laughed out of the room, not because it's happened, but because some part of you is certain it will. You think you're preparing, protecting yourself, staying realistic, but what you're really doing is wounding yourself in advance, numbing your hope before it can even take a breath. You play both roles, the one who dares to try and the one who crushes the attempt until you've already convinced yourself it's not worth it. And so, often, you don't even try. This sabotage is born from trauma, emotional scar tissue that formed when past rejections came without warning. Maybe you were shut down when you expressed a dream. Maybe you were teased for showing confidence. Maybe someone important told you, don't get your hopes up, and now you never let yourself have any. You started practicing disappointment like armor, thinking it would make the fall hurt less. But rejection rehearsal doesn't soften the blow, it deepens the wound. You live through pain that hasn't happened yet, then wonder why you feel paralyzed. You talk yourself out of joy before it even has a chance to arrive. You treat your desires like liabilities, dangerous things that must be neutralized with cynicism. And the saddest part? You start to believe the scenes you've written. You internalize the imagined no as inevitable. You let your mind become a rejection factory, spitting out reasons why you're too much, too late, not enough. You never let anyone else say no to you because you've already said it to yourself in every possible way. This isn't caution, it's self-protection turned self-sabotage. You're not just avoiding disappointment, you're making sure you experience it in advance just to stay in control. But in doing so, you become the very voice you were trying to protect yourself from. And sometimes, the loudest rejection you'll ever hear is the one you rehearsed in your own head. Mistrusting ease. Mistrusting ease is the deeply ingrained belief that if something comes naturally, flows smoothly, or feels too good, then it must be wrong. It's the unconscious reflex to brace yourself when life finally starts working. You question it, undermine it, resist it, because ease to you doesn't feel safe, it feels suspicious. You were taught, directly or indirectly, that worth is measured by effort, that struggle is noble, that suffering builds character. So now, when things begin to unfold without resistance, you wait for the other shoe to drop. You assume you missed something, that you didn't earn it, that it's temporary. You mentally sabotage the moment by looking for the flaw, the crack, the catch. Mistrusting ease shows up when you land the client without chasing, when love enters your life without drama, when you get paid well for something that felt like play. You don't relax into it. You analyze it to death. You ask, why was that so easy? What did I do wrong? Do they even know what they're paying me for? You start adding unnecessary complications just to feel like you deserve the outcome. You inflate problems. You micromanage. You work overtime to fix things that were never broken. And beneath all of that isn't doubt in the process. It's doubt in yourself. Somewhere deep in your wiring is a belief that ease equals laziness, or that joy is naive. That struggle is a sign you're taking life seriously, and peace is a sign you've let your guard down. But mistrusting ease doesn't just block your rest. It blocks your intuition, your natural gifts, your genius. You end up choosing the harder path every time, not because it's better, but because it feels more honest. You think, if I'm not suffering, I must be cheating. And so you suffer, quietly, to prove you've earned every inch of your success. The saddest part? You begin to resent people who live with flow, who trust their joy, who receive without guilt. Not because you think they're wrong, but because you want that freedom and can't allow it for yourself. Mistrusting ease isn't caution, it's self-denial. It's mistaking peace for danger, because somewhere in your story, only the hard things were ever called real. excellence aversion. Excellence aversion is the deep, often hidden fear of becoming great at something, because excellence demands visibility, responsibility, and the risk of being truly seen. It's not fear of failure, it's fear of success, fear of what happens after you win, fear of the weight that comes with being excellent, expectations, envy, exposure. You hold back, not because you don't have the talent, but because you're afraid of what that talent will require from you. Excellence means more eyes on you, more pressure, less room to hide. It means you can't blend in anymore. You can't coast. You can't be average and unnoticed. You become accountable for your power. And for some people, that is terrifying. So you stay just below your edge. You submit the draft, but never edit it to brilliance. You give a good enough performance. You avoid the extra rep, the final touch, the next level, because to rise above the crowd feels like danger, not glory. You fear being isolated, misunderstood, resented. You tell yourself you're avoiding arrogance, but really, you're avoiding evolution. Somewhere in your past, you may have learned that excellence created separation. Maybe your success made someone else feel small. Maybe you were punished for shining too brightly, told to tone it down, warned not to make others feel bad. So now, even as an adult, you equate mastery with loss. Loss of connection, of relatability, of safety. You may even disguise your aversion as balance. I don't want to be obsessive. I don't need to be the best. But the truth is, you do want it. The greatness calls to you. You just don't know how to want it without fearing what it will cost. Excellence demands ownership. It dares you to stop hiding behind effort and finally step into impact. But that's where the sabotage lives, in the quiet belief that if you become too good, you'll be left behind, or worse, left alone. So you choose the comfort of being almost great, almost ready, almost recognized, because almost feels safer than the full weight of who you could actually become. And that fear keeps you living in the shadows of your own brilliance. Toxic nostalgia. Toxic nostalgia is the aching attachment to a past that no longer serves you, but still calls to you like home. It's the longing for what was, even when what was nearly broke you. It's the selective memory that paints struggle as romance, dysfunction as depth, and pain as meaning. You look back, not to remember, but to retreat. You reach for the past when the present feels uncertain, even if the past nearly destroyed you. This isn't just missing old times. It's craving the familiar ache of a time when you were needed, defined, or in control, even if you were also unhappy, stuck, or suffering. You tell yourself things were better back then, that you were stronger, purer, more whole, but you forget the loneliness, the anxiety, the nights you begged to escape. You remember the music but not the silence, the laughs but not the numbness between them. Toxic nostalgia makes you sabotage the now because you're mourning a version of yourself that no longer exists. You second-guess new beginnings. You compare everything to what once was, even when what once was left you starving. You fantasize about old relationships, old jobs, old versions of you, not because they were healthy, but because they were known, because they had structure, because they gave your chaos a name. It shows up when you resist change, when you find comfort in your old wounds, when you try to recreate moments that have expired. You chase an emotional high that's no longer real, and in doing so, you miss what's actually possible. You stay loyal to old pain just because it's been with you longer than peace. Toxic nostalgia lies. It makes the past seem sacred and the future feel threatening. It tells you the best has already happened, that your peak is behind you, that new chapters will never compare, and so you freeze in a story that already ended, replaying scenes that feel safer than the unknown. You scroll through old photos like prayers. You replay old songs like spells. You stay emotionally parked in places you physically left long ago, not because you belong there, but because you don't yet believe you deserve what's ahead. Clarity avoidance. Clarity avoidance is the self-protective act of staying confused on purpose. It's pretending you don't know what you want, what you need, or where you're going, not because the answers aren't there, but because naming them would demand change. It would demand action. It would demand risk. And so you linger in the fog, circling questions you're too afraid to answer. You say things like, "I'm still figuring it out," or "I'm exploring my options," or "I'm not sure yet," even when deep down you are sure. You do know the job isn't right, the relationship is done, the dream is real, but saying it out loud would make it real. It would make you responsible. So instead, you stay blurry. You convince yourself you need more time, more signs, more certainty before you commit to a direction. Clarity is power, but it's also accountability. Once you know what you want, you can't unknow it. You can't unsee the truth. You can't keep blaming confusion when what you're really avoiding is the fear of what clarity might destroy. Your comfort, your image, your excuses. And it's not laziness, it's self-preservation. Clarity can cost you relationships. It can mean outgrowing people who love the confused version of you. It can mean leaving safety, structure, or the roles that earned you approval. When you get clear, things break. And that breaking, while necessary, is terrifying. So you delay the knowing. You stay busy. You ask for advice you don't really need. You overthink. You make pros and cons lists that go nowhere. You exhaust yourself with mental gymnastics just to avoid facing the truth that's been quietly screaming inside you. But the cost of clarity avoidance is your life, lived halfway. You keep chasing alignment while dodging the mirror. You wonder why nothing feels quite right, why motivation fades, why you keep circling the same dilemmas. It's because you're not stuck, you're hiding. And until you're willing to face the clarity you already have, you'll keep calling your fear confusion and your avoidance a process. Underdog addiction. Underdog addiction is the psychological attachment to being the struggler, the underestimated, the one who fights their way from behind. It's the part of you that needs to be counted out, doubted, overlooked, because it's the only way you know how to rise. You don't just identify with the underdog, you are addicted to the emotional high of proving people wrong. Winning is sweet, but only if it's painful, only if it's dramatic, only if you had to bleed for it. You tell yourself you thrive under pressure, that you work best with your back against the wall, that you like being the long shot, but that story slowly becomes a trap. You start creating the disadvantage just to feel worthy of the win. You wait until the last minute. You take the harder route. You ignore support. You reject ease, not because you can't take the fast lane, but because the fast lane doesn't feel real to you. You're so used to scrapping for your survival that thriving feels foreign. Calm feels like weakness. Being ahead of the game makes you anxious. If there's no struggle, there's no fuel. So you burn yourself to the ground just to build something again, over and over, because the climb is where you feel most alive, not the arrival. Underdog addiction often forms in childhood, when being underestimated meant freedom, or when love only came after you'd earned it. So now, you unconsciously seek out imbalance. You pair with people who doubt you. You place yourself in roles where you're undervalued. You say yes to things that break you, just to prove you can survive them. You'd rather be underestimated than overexposed. You'd rather be the fighter than the leader, because leading requires being seen, and being seen feels far more dangerous than being doubted. And when you finally do succeed, you downplay it. You self-sabotage. You throw yourself back into chaos, because being ahead doesn't feel honest. You know how to rise from nothing, but you don't know how to thrive in everything. Because somewhere deep inside, you don't just believe you're the underdog. You believe that's the only version of you the world will ever root for. Burnout as a badge. Burnout as a badge is the toxic belief that your exhaustion is proof of your worth, that being constantly overwhelmed, overworked, and stretched thin is not only normal, but noble. You wear your fatigue like armor. You brag about your sleepless nights, your never-ending to-do lists, your inability to rest, as if suffering is a status symbol, as if burnout is the price of being valuable. You don't just tolerate burnout, you chase it, because somewhere along the way, you learned that to be loved, respected, or taken seriously, you had to be useful. And usefulness, in this twisted logic, means self-sacrifice. So you say yes when you want to scream no. You keep giving long after the tank is empty. You equate stillness with laziness. Rest feels dangerous. Rest feels like disappearing. This sabotage thrives in high achievers, caretakers, perfectionists, the ones who were told, directly or indirectly, that doing more made them enough. You measure your worth by output. You fear disappointing others more than betraying yourself. You believe if you're not struggling, you're not trying hard enough. Burnout becomes your currency. You earn your seat at the table through suffering. You bond with others over stress. You take pride in how much you can handle, as if carrying the heaviest load proves you're the strongest. And deep down, you hope someone notices, admires it, maybe even rescues you. But no one does, because the world sees your burnout and assumes you're built for it. And eventually, something cracks. Your health, your creativity, your joy. But even then, you might push through, telling yourself this is just how life is, because the alternative, slowing down, feels more terrifying than collapse. You've been taught that being tired means being trustworthy, that being drained means being dedicated, that being unavailable to yourself means being essential to everyone else. But the truth is, burnout is not a badge, it's a bruise, a mark of how far you've gone to prove what was never meant to be questioned in the first place, that you are enough, even when you do nothing at all. Feedback phobia. Feedback phobia is the deep gut-level fear that hearing the truth about yourself will destroy you. It's the anxiety that creeps in when someone says, "Can I give you some advice?" and your heart sinks like you've been caught. Even the idea of being evaluated triggers a silent panic, because feedback doesn't just feel like information. It feels like judgment, like rejection, like exposure. You don't fear growth, you fear the wound that might come with it. Somewhere along the way, you learned that being corrected meant being wrong, and being wrong meant being unworthy. Maybe you grew up in a home where criticism wasn't guidance, it was punishment. Or in an environment where mistakes weren't allowed, and even your best effort came with a side of shame. So now, every time someone offers insight, your nervous system interprets it as an attack. You start avoiding situations where feedback might appear. You procrastinate on delivering work. You don't ask how you're doing. You play it safe with your creativity. You obsess over perfecting things so no one has a reason to fix them. You over-explain everything in advance just to shield yourself from someone pointing out what you already fear is wrong. Feedback phobia is isolating. You become your own echo chamber. You crave improvement, but block the very thing that would give it to you. You tell yourself you want to get better, but only if it doesn't sting, only if it doesn't challenge your ego, only if it doesn't confirm that quiet voice inside you that whispers, "You're not enough." And the cruelest part? You start mistaking silence for approval. You think if no one's critiquing you, you must be doing great. But really, you've just armored yourself so well that no one gets close enough to help. You don't get better, you just get more afraid. Feedback phobia doesn't mean you're weak. It means you were once wounded where you should have been supported, and now every suggestion feels like a scalpel. So you run, you hide, you shrink, not because you can't handle the truth, but because no one ever taught you that the truth could be kind. Productivity masquerading as progress. Productivity masquerading as progress is the illusion that staying busy means moving forward. You fill your days with tasks, checklists, back-to-back meetings, and endless errands. not to build something meaningful, but to quiet the anxiety that comes with stillness. You chase motion, not direction. Activity becomes your drug, your distraction, your disguise for the fear that you're not actually going anywhere that matters. You tell yourself you're making progress because you're exhausted, because your calendar is full, because your inbox is overflowing. But beneath the surface, a quieter truth gnaws at you. You're mistaking movement for momentum. You're doing more and becoming less. Your days are packed, but your purpose is lost. This sabotage is dangerous because it feels productive. It's easy to justify. You convince yourself that being busy means being disciplined, ambitious, focused, but deep down, you're avoiding the work that truly matters. The creative leap, the difficult conversation, the bold idea that would actually move the needle. Why? Because those things come with risk, with failure, with vulnerability. So instead, you cling to what's safe, staying occupied. You rearrange your workspace instead of starting the project. You reply to emails instead of writing the book. You research tools instead of using the ones you have. You become obsessed with optimization, with systems, with strategy, while the actual work waits in the shadows, untouched. It's not that you're unmotivated, it's that you're afraid, and productivity becomes the perfect hiding place. You get high off the sense of control it gives you, the dopamine rush of finishing a task, the comfort of checking a box. But after a while, it becomes hollow. You start to feel empty despite your effort, directionless despite your discipline, and no matter how much you do, it never feels like enough, because deep down, you know it's not the right things being done. Productivity isn't the enemy, but when it becomes your identity, your escape, your worth, it blinds you to the truth that real progress is uncomfortable, it's uncertain, it requires courage, not calendars. And until you stop worshiping busyness, you'll keep mistaking the act of working for the art of becoming. Fear of finishing. Fear of finishing is the invisible hand that pulls you back just as you reach the edge of completion. It's not loud or obvious. It shows up as sudden fatigue, endless tweaking, or a convenient crisis that just came up. You convince yourself there's more to fix, more to learn, more to prepare, anything to avoid the final step. Because finishing doesn't just mean the end of a task. It means exposure. It means release. It means risk. As long as something is in progress, it's safe. It can still be improved, protected, hidden. But once it's done, it has to face the world. And that's where the fear lives. What if no one cares? What if they do and tear it apart? What if it's not as good as you hoped? Or worse, exactly as good as you feared? Finishing strips you of the fantasy that this thing might one day be perfect. It forces you to find out if it's enough. This fear runs deeper than procrastination. It's about identity. You've spent so long in the becoming that you don't know who you are without the process. Your unfinished novel, your half-built business, your almost ready application. These things have become symbols of potential, and potential is safe because it can't be judged. But finished work gets seen. So you stay stuck in the endless loop of almost. You romanticize the grind, the late nights, the drafts. You tell yourself it's not ready, but really, you're not ready. You fear what it means to close the chapter, to be held accountable for your brilliance, to make a statement and stand by it. And when you do finish something, you rush to the next thing, skipping the discomfort of being seen. You never celebrate. You never breathe. Because finishing forces you to confront the truth. You're not afraid of failure. You're afraid of arrival. The fear of finishing convinces you that delay is preparation. But it's not. It's protection. A way to keep your dreams intact by never letting them face the world. Because once they do, there's no going back. And for some part of you, that final step feels like standing naked in front of everything you've ever wanted and not knowing if it will love you back. Shortcut shame. Shortcut shame is the hidden guilt you carry when things come to you easily, when success doesn't feel like suffering, when progress doesn't feel earned through pain. It's the quiet voice that says, I didn't struggle enough to deserve this. You downplay your wins. You second-guess your methods. You overcompensate with unnecessary effort, all because you took a faster route, and somewhere deep inside, you believe that ease equals fraud. You've been conditioned to believe that the long, grueling path is the only legitimate one, that real growth must hurt, that anything that feels natural, intuitive, or quick must be cheating. So when you find a better system, a smarter approach, or your own unique way of doing things, you don't celebrate it, you question it. You feel like you've skipped a rite of passage, like you've stolen something you were supposed to suffer for. This sabotage is especially brutal for those who grew up watching others grind themselves into the ground just to survive. When you come from struggle, rest can feel disrespectful. Efficiency can feel disloyal. Taking a shortcut feels like you're abandoning the people who had no choice but to take the hard way. So you add struggle back into your journey. You complicate the simple. You rework what doesn't need fixing. You stay longer in the learning phase than necessary, so no one can accuse you of rushing. You carry a constant pressure to prove that you've earned it, even when no one is asking you to. But shortcut shame doesn't make you better. It just makes you tired. It steals the joy from your genius. It convinces you that ease is the enemy, when in reality, it's the evidence of alignment. The truth is, some things are supposed to feel natural. Some things are meant to flow, and that doesn't mean you're cheating. It means you've found resonance. Yet the shame lingers. You fear being judged, resented, exposed as someone who didn't pay their dues. So you suffer, not because you need to, but because some part of you still believes struggle makes you worthy, as if the only real success is the one that nearly breaks you. Chronic comparison syndrome. Chronic comparison syndrome is the relentless, soul-draining habit of measuring your life against someone else's until your own feels like it's never enough. It's the constant scrolling, the silent envy, the subtle sting you feel when someone you know announces their success. You don't even have to dislike them. In fact, you might admire them deeply, but underneath that admiration lives a quiet self-judgment that whispers, you're behind, you're not doing enough, you should be further by now. This isn't about healthy inspiration. This is comparison as self-punishment. You start keeping score without realizing it. Body, career, relationship, happiness, attention. Every photo becomes proof that you're lacking. Every milestone someone else hits becomes a reminder that yours hasn't come yet. You look at their highlight reel and hold it up to your behind-the-scenes chaos. And of course, you always come up short. Chronic comparison doesn't just wound your confidence, it paralyzes it. You stop creating because someone else already did it better. You stop speaking because someone else is louder. You stop trying because someone else made it look easy. And now your struggle feels like failure. You tell yourself, why bother? The space is already taken. But the truth is, comparison didn't show you the truth. It robbed you of perspective. What's most painful is that you don't even realize how much it's costing you. You scroll to feel connected and instead end up feeling smaller. You look to others for hope and end up with shame. You used to be proud of your progress until someone else moved faster. You used to love your life until you saw a filtered version of someone else's. And the worst part? You start shrinking yourself quietly. You don't share your wins, afraid they don't measure up. You question your own dreams, thinking they're too simple, too late, too far behind. You stop looking inward for purpose and start looking outward for permission. Chronic comparison becomes a thief of joy, of clarity, of momentum. It convinces you that someone else's success is evidence of your failure, that the world only has room for one version of beautiful, successful, lovable, and that version is never you. Fear of upstaging others. Fear of upstaging others is the silent agreement you make with yourself to stay smaller than your truth, just to keep others comfortable. It's the instinct to hold back your brilliance, to soften your voice, to dim your presence so you don't threaten, overshadow, or outshine the people around you. You don't do it because you lack confidence. You do it because somewhere deep inside, you equate visibility with betrayal. This fear often forms in relationships where connection was tied to sameness. Maybe you were taught not to make a scene. Maybe your success made others jealous, uncomfortable, or passive-aggressively critical. Maybe you felt the shift in energy when you shared good news and saw someone else's face tighten. So you learned the subtle art of minimizing, of making yourself more relatable by making yourself less radiant. You stop sharing wins. You pretend things are harder than they are. You apologize for your progress. You become a master at managing other people's egos, carrying the invisible emotional labor of keeping everyone around you from feeling left behind. And what's worse, it works. They stay close. They feel safe, but you feel trapped. Because the truth is, you're not responsible for their insecurities, and yet you've made yourself small to avoid activating them. You've tied your own evolution to their comfort. You stay in step, not because you're lost, but because you're afraid of what walking ahead will cost you. You fear being too much, too ambitious, too lucky. So you sabotage your own momentum to stay digestible. But in doing so, you betray yourself. You dull your edge. You start to resent the very people you're protecting. You feel unseen, not because they can't see you, but because you never let them. You were too busy making sure your light didn't cast a shadow. Fear of upstaging others convinces you that your growth is a threat to your relationships, that shining means separation, that success must be lonely. So you settle for connection that requires your silence. And in the process, you trade your full expression for acceptance that was never unconditional to begin with. Unconscious shame bonding. Unconscious shame bonding is the invisible thread that ties relationships together through mutual pain instead of mutual growth. It's the silent agreement that says, I'll keep hiding my light if you keep hiding yours. It feels like connection, but it's really a contract, one based not on truth, but on shared insecurity. And breaking it, even by healing, feels like betrayal. You don't choose shame bonds on purpose. They form in places where vulnerability was once punished, where authenticity was risky, where hiding parts of yourself felt like survival. And when you meet someone who shares that same emotional wound, it feels safe, familiar. You bond over what hurts, over what's missing, over who made you feel small. It feels intimate, like understanding. But in reality, it's a mutual agreement to stay stuck. In these relationships, growth becomes a threat. The moment you start to rise, whether emotionally, professionally, spiritually, you feel guilt. You tone yourself down. You make yourself smaller. You subconsciously fear that if you evolve too far, the bond will break. Because the foundation wasn't built on who you are, it was built on who you were when you were broken. Shame bonding keeps people emotionally frozen. It rewards dysfunction and punishes transformation. You might notice that when you try to set boundaries, you're met with resentment. When you try to speak highly of yourself, you're met with silence. When you try to move forward, you're reminded, don't forget where you came from. But what they're really saying is, don't leave me behind. The trap is that you confuse guilt for loyalty. You stay loyal to your pain so you can stay loyal to the people who knew you in it. You hold back on your healing so you don't disrupt the dynamic. You tell yourself it's compassion, but really it's fear. Fear of being alone, fear of being rejected, fear of discovering that love built on shame might not survive your freedom. Unconscious shame bonding isn't always toxic in an obvious way. Sometimes it's quiet. Sometimes it even looks like love, but you'll know it by the way you shrink every time you start to shine, by the way you feel more accepted in your struggle than in your joy, by the way healing starts to feel disloyal. Invisible effort syndrome. Invisible effort syndrome is the exhausting pattern of working relentlessly behind the scenes, then feeling unseen, unrecognized, and quietly resentful when no one notices. It's pouring your heart, your time, your energy into everything and still feeling like it doesn't count because your struggle wasn't visible. You do the work, you carry the weight, but because you do it quietly, cleanly, without complaint, the world assumes it was easy, so they praise others louder. They overlook you, and it hurts. You've been conditioned to believe that effort only matters if it's on display, that pain needs to be public to be valid, that struggle must be theatrical to be acknowledged. So when you move through life solving, supporting, fixing, giving, without drama, without collapse, your contribution becomes invisible, even to yourself. And this isn't because you're passive, you're powerful, but you've made a habit of making hard things look effortless. You show up, you over-deliver, you stay composed, you manage chaos in silence. But when the recognition doesn't come, when others get credit for less, you start to feel hollow, like maybe it's your fault for being so capable. You begin to associate being strong with being unseen, and so you keep proving your worth through silent endurance, thinking someday someone will finally see you. But no one does, because you taught them not to look. This syndrome often begins in childhood, where being low maintenance earned you love, or where expressing need was punished, ignored, or shamed. You learn to handle things on your own, to anticipate what others needed before they even asked. And now you carry that survival pattern into every room you walk into, at work, in love, in friendships, over-functioning until you disappear inside your own competence. You don't ask for help, you don't show the mess, you don't reveal how hard it is, because you think if people really knew how much it costs you, they'd think you're weak, or worse, they'd still overlook you, and that kind of invisibility would be unbearable. Invisible effort syndrome isn't about doing too much. It's about doing too much without being seen, and over time, it doesn't just drain your energy, it erodes your sense of worth, leaving you wondering if anything you do will ever feel like it was enough to matter. Authenticity as excuse is the cleverly disguised form of self-sabotage, where being real becomes the justification for staying small, unpolished, or emotionally avoidant. It's when you weaponize the idea of authenticity to protect yourself from growth, discomfort, or accountability. You don't say, "I'm scared." You say, "I'm just being myself." You don't say, "I don't want to risk failing." You say, "That's just not me." It sounds empowering, but underneath, it's fear dressed in self-righteousness. This kind of sabotage masquerades as integrity. You avoid structure because I'm more intuitive. You dodge feedback because I need to stay true to my voice. You refuse to change habits, refine your message, or push through resistance because effort feels fake, as if being deliberate about your success means you're no longer being true to who you are. But what you're really doing is confusing comfort with authenticity. True authenticity often requires change. It demands that you meet yourself honestly, even when that truth is messy, contradictory, or painful. Sometimes your most real self is buried under layers of conditioning, fear, or outdated coping mechanisms. But authenticity as excuse keeps you clinging to what's familiar simply because it's yours. You'll know you're doing this when you start dismissing opportunities as not aligned, when they're actually just intimidating, when you stop yourself from evolving because this is just who I am, when you retreat into your quirks, flaws, or trauma, stories not as truth, but as shields. There's a difference between honoring your truth and hiding behind it, between living in alignment and avoiding accountability, between being authentic and being unchallenged. But when you're scared of outgrowing your own narrative, you mistake stagnation for self-awareness. The irony is that the version of you you're defending so fiercely might not even be your truest self. It's just the version that feels safest, the one you crafted to survive, the one that didn't risk too much, the one that got love for being easy, predictable, relatable. So you wave the authenticity flag like armor. But deep down, there's a version of you on the other side of discomfort that's still real and far more powerful. You're not staying true to yourself, you're just staying safe. Fantasy over action. Fantasy over action is the intoxicating trap of living so deeply in the rehearsal of your dreams that you begin to mistake the fantasy for real movement. It starts with a vision, a powerful, beautiful picture of what could be. You imagine the speech, the spotlight, the product launch, the applause. You play out the perfect execution in your mind over and over again, and for a moment it feels like action, but it's not. It's mental overdrive with no real-world traction. You tell yourself you're getting ready. You walk through the details, script the conversations, visualize the outcomes. It feels productive, it feels important, but beneath it all, you're stalling. You're sedating your desire with simulation. The more you imagine, the less urgency you feel to actually do anything. Your brain gets the dopamine hit of achievement without the risk of failure. Fantasy over action is seductive because it feels safe. It keeps you in control. In your mind, everything goes exactly as planned. No rejection, no mess, no uncertainty. And that control becomes addictive. You become a master of possibilities, but a stranger to execution. You confuse clarity with courage and preparation with progress. This sabotage is especially cruel for creatives and visionaries, the ones who can see the future so vividly they start to feel as if it's already real. But the gap between imagined success and lived experience grows wider, and with it, a haunting emptiness sets in. Because while you've mentally lived it 100 times, your real life remains unchanged. You begin to wonder why you're so exhausted when nothing has actually happened, why your dreams feel more like burdens than inspiration. It's because you've been emotionally investing in a life you haven't stepped into. You've been acting out the finish line in your mind without ever taking the first real step. Fantasy over action isn't dreaming, it's drowning. Drowning in mental rehearsal, in perfect scenarios, in future versions of you that never get a chance to breathe. And the longer you stay there, the harder it becomes to tolerate reality's imperfect beginnings. So you wait, you fantasize, you overthink, and all the while, the life you want quietly waits behind the door you still haven't opened. Analysis as identity is the hidden addiction to thinking over doing, where your worth becomes tethered to how deeply, critically, or intelligently you process life rather than how fully you live it. You become the observer, the strategist, the overthinker, the one who always has a take, always sees another angle, always dissects every move. You feel valuable not by participating, but by understanding deeply, endlessly, obsessively. But beneath the intellectual sharpness lies fear. Fear of vulnerability, fear of failure, fear of not having all the answers. So instead of risking messy, real experience, you retreat into your mind. You analyze your emotions instead of feeling them. You plan your next steps instead of taking them. You watch life happen and convince yourself that insight is just as powerful as action, but it's not. You become so skilled at analyzing everything, yourself, others, your past, your trauma, your patterns, that the analysis itself becomes a form of control. You believe that if you can just understand it enough, you'll be safe from it. If you can name the wound, it won't hurt. If you can anticipate every outcome, you'll never be disappointed. But you end up paralyzed. You can describe your fear in perfect language and still not move through it. You can trace your cycles with surgical clarity and still stay stuck in them. You convince yourself that you're growing because you're thinking about growing, but you haven't left the mirror. What's worse is that this identity often gets praised. People admire your insight. They call you deep, wise, self-aware, And that praise reinforces the pattern. You start mistaking analysis for healing, interpretation for transformation, knowledge for embodiment. You collect epiphanies but resist action. You ask powerful questions but avoid the answers that require risk. And when someone challenges you to do, you bristle. You intellectualize. You shift back into safety, into control, because living in your head has become your armor. And taking action would mean stepping out into the unknown, where no amount of brilliance can save you from being seen, hurt, or changed. Analysis is a tool, but when it becomes your identity, it becomes a cage, one where clarity becomes a substitute for courage, and where the truth of who you are stays trapped beneath the brilliance of what you know. Obsessive self-monitoring is the exhausting compulsion to constantly watch yourself from the outside as if you're performing under a spotlight, even when no one's watching. It's the mental surveillance that turns every conversation, every decision, every movement into a performance to be critiqued in real time. You're never just being, you're reviewing, editing, adjusting, shrinking. You become both the actor and the relentless critic, caught in a loop of self-consciousness that never turns off. You walk into a room and instantly assess, did I say too much? Was that laugh too loud? Are they bored? Did I look insecure? Even in solitude, your mind replays every moment, hunting for mistakes, for anything that might have been too much or not enough. And when you leave, you don't leave. You linger in the scene, dissecting it frame by frame, wondering how you could have done it better. This sabotage often begins with early shame. Maybe you were constantly corrected or praised only when you performed just right. Maybe you were mocked, dismissed, or made to feel like your natural expression was a liability. So you learn to police yourself, closely, obsessively, because somewhere along the way, you decided your survival depended on it. It's not just about insecurity. It's about hypervigilance, about trying to control how the world sees you so you're never caught off guard, never embarrassed, never exposed. But the cost is brutal. You lose your spontaneity. You disconnect from your own emotions. You forget how to be present because you're too busy watching yourself have the experience instead of living it. Obsessive self-monitoring makes connection nearly impossible. You're too in your head to be in your heart. You filter your truth before it even reaches your lips. You try to preemptively manage every reaction others might have, and in doing so, you become a stranger to yourself. And worst of all, even when you do everything right, the voice in your head still finds something wrong, something awkward, something unlikable, because it was never really about impressing others. It was about proving over and over again that you are safe to be seen. But when you live in constant self-surveillance, the only thing people really see is that you don't feel safe inside your own skin. Talent, disbelief, reflex. Talent's disbelief reflex is the automatic, deeply ingrained habit of rejecting your own brilliance the moment it reveals itself. It's that inner recoil when someone compliments your gift and you instantly minimize it. It's the discomfort you feel when your work comes naturally and you assume it must not be valuable. It's the quiet conviction that if it didn't almost kill you, it probably wasn't worth anything. You don't see your talent, you second guess it. You chalk your strengths up to luck, timing, or just doing your job. When people recognize your genius, you look over your shoulder, wondering who they're actually talking about. You feel like an imposter, not because you're lacking, but because somewhere deep inside, you can't quite accept that your easiest expressions might be your most powerful. This reflex is born from conditioning. Maybe you were only praised when you pushed yourself past the brink. Maybe your natural gifts were ignored or even mocked. Maybe someone once made you feel like shining too brightly was arrogant. So now, when something flows through you effortlessly, your first instinct isn't gratitude, it's suspicion. You don't trust ease. You don't trust gifts. You don't trust you. You start believing that talent isn't real unless it's backed by burnout, that success isn't valid unless it's earned through struggle. So you overwork, you over-explain, you over-edit, you bury your natural voice under layers of proof and productivity just to convince yourself that you deserve the praise. And even when you win, you sabotage. You tell yourself the work wasn't your best. You worry they'll find out you're not that good. You strip your own power before anyone else can. You call it humility. You call it realism. But what it really is fear. Talent, disbelief, reflex doesn't just keep you small, it keeps you disconnected from your own purpose, because the very thing you're meant to do, the thing that would change your life and others, is the one thing you keep dismissing, not because it's not real, but because it's yours. And somewhere along the way, you learn that you weren't enough. So when your gift speaks, you silence it before anyone else has the chance to. Hypercontextual thinking is the mental trap of needing every variable, every condition, every perfect circumstance in place before allowing yourself to act, decide, or believe. It's the obsessive tendency to overthink in layers. What if it's not the right time? What if the market shifts? What if they're in a bad mood today? What if I need more clarity, data, reassurance, until your clarity drowns in contingencies? You don't just want to make the right choice. You want to make the perfectly informed one. You want guarantees. You want every piece of the puzzle in place, every possible reaction accounted for, every risk pre-solved. And until then, you wait. You hesitate. You plan again. Not because you're unsure of what you want, but because your brain has convinced you that action without absolute certainty is recklessness. You build mental spreadsheets for conversations. You pre-script your vulnerability. You analyze timing, tone, temperature, everything. You become addicted to the conditions around your choices instead of the truth inside them. And while this looks like intelligence or strategic thinking on the outside, inside, it's anxiety disguised as logic. It's a form of control, and it's slowly killing your momentum. This pattern often forms from environments where mistakes had high emotional costs, where a wrong move meant shame, rejection, or punishment. So now you over-contextualize everything in the hope of never being caught off guard again. You try to pre-live every scenario to reduce the sting of being wrong. But what you're really doing is building a mental cage made of what-ifs. And the world doesn't wait. While you calculate, someone else acts. While you wonder if this is the right time, someone else is already failing forward. Hypercontextual thinking keeps you in your head so long, life starts to pass you by. Not because you lack talent, but because you've put your intuition through a bureaucracy of over-analysis. You don't need more data. You need to stop using complexity as a shield, because clarity isn't found in more context. It's found in the courage to act, even when the context is incomplete. And until you trust your ability to handle imperfection, you'll keep waiting for a perfect moment that never arrives. Avoiding joy as a safety mechanism. Avoiding joy as a safety mechanism is the heartbreaking habit of turning away from happiness the moment it starts to rise. It's the instant you feel a wave of excitement and shut it down. The moment you start to relax and your mind interrupts with "don't get too comfortable." It's not that you don't want to feel joy, it's that joy feels dangerous. To your nervous system, joy is exposure, it's vulnerability, it's a target on your back. Somewhere deep in your wiring, joy became the signal that something bad was about to happen. Maybe you grew up in a home where laughter was followed by punishment. Maybe good news always came with a price. Maybe, somewhere along the line, you were taught, if things are going too well, something is about to go wrong. So now, your joy comes with terms and conditions. You sabotage celebrations with worry. You shrink good news with disclaimers. You interrupt your own lightness with panic. You scan for danger in the middle of peace. You feel love, and immediately imagine loss. You get the opportunity, the relationship, the dream, and you start preparing for the moment it's ripped away, not because it's inevitable, but because bracing feels safer than breaking. You don't just fear failure, you fear hope. Hope feels like a setup, joy feels like a trap, and so you keep yourself just slightly unhappy, slightly underwhelmed, slightly distant from fulfillment, because the crash hurts less when you never fully lift off. Avoiding joy is a defense mechanism so old you don't even notice it anymore. You call it being realistic, you call it being grounded, but the truth is, you've confused protection with deprivation. You think if you deny yourself the highs, the lows won't hit as hard, but you're not avoiding pain, you're avoiding life. And perhaps the most devastating part, you start to believe joy simply isn't for you, that you're just wired differently, that peace, ease, celebration, that's for other people. You become the one who always pulls away, who smiles with tension, who laughs but doesn't let it land, because to feel good deeply and fully would mean finally letting your guard down, and for some part of you, that's still the most terrifying risk of all. Tolerating the unacceptable. Tolerating the unacceptable is the slow, soul-depleting habit of convincing yourself that what hurts is normal, that what drains you is deserved, and that what breaks you is somehow your fault. It's not just about enduring discomfort, it's about adapting so well to mistreatment, disrespect, or emotional neglect that you stop seeing it as wrong. You start calling it strength. You start calling it being the bigger person. But really, it's self-abandonment in disguise. You make excuses for people who take from you, but never pour back. You rationalize toxic work environments, unhealthy relationships, one-sided friendships. You whisper things like, it's not that bad, or I'm probably overreacting, or they didn't mean it. And every time you say it, you shrink a little more. You lower the bar a little further. You teach the world, quietly but clearly, that you'll stay, even when it hurts. This sabotage often comes from a life where boundaries were never respected. Maybe you were taught to be agreeable at any cost. Maybe you were rewarded for enduring, for keeping the peace, for not making waves. So now, pain feels familiar and safety feels suspicious. You don't trust ease. You don't believe in fairness. You believe in endurance. You become a master of tolerance. You know how to hold your breath emotionally. You smile when your needs are ignored. You stay quiet when your worth is questioned. You carry more than your share of blame, of guilt, of the emotional mess other people won't clean up. And over time, you forget where the line even was. What's most dangerous is that the more you tolerate, the harder it becomes to walk away. You internalize the message that this is just how life is. You confuse resilience with resignation, and before you know it, you're stuck in a story you didn't choose, just because you didn't believe you had the right to rewrite it. Tolerating the unacceptable doesn't make you noble, it makes you disappear, slowly, quietly, completely. And one day, you wake up exhausted, not from what you've endured, but from the silence of never saying, this is not okay. Over-explaining instinct. The over-explaining instinct is the knee-jerk compulsion to justify your every thought, decision, or boundary, as if simply being isn't enough. It's the reflex to pad your no with reasons, your emotions with disclaimers, and your needs with a softening filter. You talk yourself in circles trying to convince others that you're not difficult, selfish, or wrong, not because you owe them an explanation, but because you don't fully believe you have the right not to. It begins early, often in environments where being understood was a survival skill. Maybe you grew up walking on eggshells around unpredictable parents. Maybe you learned that being questioned meant being shamed, so now you explain constantly. You try to preempt discomfort, manage others' reactions, and make your presence more digestible. You stretch yourself thin with context and background, hoping that if they just get it, they won't get upset. You tell yourself you're being thoughtful, clear, helpful, but deep down, it's fear. Fear of being misunderstood, fear of being seen as rude, abrupt, cold, ungrateful, fear that if you don't explain, they'll make up a story about you and it'll be worse than the truth. So you overshare, overcompensate. You give people the full map when they only asked for a direction, and it's exhausting. You leave conversations feeling depleted, exposed, uncertain. You replay what you said, wondering if it was too much or not enough. You feel emotionally hungover from the constant pressure to prove that you meant well, that you deserve grace, that your no isn't rejection, your needs aren't burdens, your truth isn't a threat. The over-explaining instinct isn't about communication, it's about worth. It's what happens when you've internalized the belief that your truth alone doesn't justify itself, that you must earn permission to take up space, make decisions, or be inconvenient. And the most painful part, the people who need your over-explaining don't deserve your energy. And the ones who deserve your truth, they don't need the explanation. But still, you explain, because somewhere inside, you're still trying to convince the world that you're allowed to exist without apology, that you're not too much, that you're safe to believe, even when you speak plainly, even when you speak once, even when you don't speak at all. Pathological niceness. Pathological niceness is the compulsive need to be agreeable, pleasant, and likable at the cost of your own truth. It's not kindness, it's self-erasure dressed in a smile. You say yes when you mean no. You soften your tone so others won't feel discomfort. You minimize your needs, your pain, your anger to keep the peace. And on the surface, you're the easy one, the dependable one, the good one. But underneath, you're boiling with resentment, exhaustion, and loneliness. You've made niceness your armor, not because you're weak, but because at some point you learned that love was conditional, that approval had to be earned, that anger was dangerous. So you became nice to survive. You became nice to be safe. And now, even when you want to speak your truth, something in your body freezes. The smile locks in place. The words get edited before they reach your lips. You don't just want people to like you. You need them to. Pathological niceness turns you into a chameleon. You absorb the energy of every room. You mirror others' moods, opinions, needs. You become what people want you to be, just to avoid conflict, disapproval, or distance. You convince yourself you're being generous, compassionate, understanding. But the truth is, you're afraid that if you stop being nice, people will leave, or worse, they'll see who you really are and decide it's not enough. And the world rewards you for it. You get praise for being easygoing, low maintenance, selfless. But the cost is steep. You lose your voice. You forget your preferences. You suppress your rage until it leaks out sideways. In anxiety, in bitterness, in passive aggression you hate yourself for. You give so much of yourself away that when someone finally asks, "What do you want?" you genuinely don't know, because you've spent years tending to everyone else's comfort while abandoning your own. You've become addicted to being liked, but what you really crave is to be known, to be chosen as you are, not as the version you polished to keep the peace. Pathological niceness doesn't create harmony. It creates silence, and eventually, that silence becomes a prison you can't escape without finally choosing to be real, even if it means no longer being nice. Grief guilt. Grief guilt is the haunting feeling that you're somehow doing your loss wrong, that you're grieving too much or not enough, that you're moving on too quickly or taking too long. It's the voice in your head that whispers, "You should be stronger by now," while another voice screams, "How dare you smile when they're gone?" Grief is already hard, but grief guilt makes it cruel. This guilt doesn't care if your grief is fresh or years old. It lingers in the cracks of your healing, waiting to pounce whenever you feel a moment of peace. You laugh, then wince. You relax, then flinch. Because joy feels like betrayal, because functioning feels like forgetting, because some part of you believes that if you let go of the pain, you're letting go of them. You start measuring your grief against others. You wonder if you're feeling the right things. You question why you didn't cry at the funeral or why you still cry over a song that reminds you of them. You try to package your mourning into something palatable, something strong, something graceful, something that doesn't make other people uncomfortable. But inside, you're at war. And sometimes the guilt isn't just about them being gone, it's about how they left. You replay the last words, the missed call, the things you didn't say, the moments you weren't there. You carry this invisible shame, like you should have known, should have fixed it, should have been better. You punish yourself with memory, with silence, with impossible what-ifs. Grief guilt also shows up when the world keeps turning, when you go back to work, when you fall in love again, when you start building a life that no longer includes them, and you feel a strange, suffocating sadness, not just because they're gone, but because you're still here, still waking up, still eating, still breathing. And deep down, you wonder if healing means forgetting, if moving forward means losing them all over again. You hold on to your sorrow, not just out of pain, but out of loyalty, because somewhere in the shadow of your loss, you've come to believe that suffering is the only proof that you ever loved them at all. Cognitive resentment loop. The cognitive resentment loop is the exhausting cycle where you repeatedly replay the same injustice, betrayal, or emotional wound in your mind, not to heal it, but to fuel it. It's the mental trap of rehearsing your anger, reliving the unfair moment, retrialing the conversation again and again while telling yourself it's just reflection. But it's not. It's rumination weaponized. You're not thinking it through. You're getting high on being hurt. At first, it feels like you're seeking clarity. You dissect what they said, what you should have said, what you could say next time. You build your defense, your proof, your imagined confrontation. You replay the moment to feel powerful, to feel righteous, to feel anything other than the helplessness that lingers underneath the hurt. But instead of releasing the pain, you bind yourself to it. The resentment grows louder with each replay. It takes up space in your thoughts, in your body, in your energy. It becomes the lens through which you see everything. You start to mistrust others before they've done anything wrong. You brace for betrayal in situations that haven't happened, and still, you can't stop thinking about it. This loop is deceptive because it feels like control, like you're keeping yourself safe by staying vigilant, guarded, ready, but you're not moving forward. You're just circling the same emotional drain again and again, hoping that one more mental rehearsal will finally make it feel fair, that justice, closure, or revenge will come from within, but it never does. And what makes this loop so damaging is that it keeps you bonded to the very people and moments that hurt you. You hand them your peace in exchange for self-righteous suffering. You relive the wound, not because you can't move on, but because deep down, you're afraid that letting go means what they did didn't matter. You mistake forgiveness for permission. You confuse closure with erasure, so you stay in the loop because resentment feels powerful, but it's a power that burns you first. Every thought feels like armor, but it's really a cage, and the longer you stay there, the more your mind becomes a battlefield where you fight for justice, but never find peace. Fear of irrelevance. Fear of irrelevance is the gnawing, unspoken terror that one day you'll stop mattering, that the world will move on without you, that your voice, your work, your presence will fade into background noise while everyone else races ahead. It's not just fear of being forgotten, it's fear of becoming invisible while still alive. This fear doesn't shout, it simmers. It shows up in the restless need to stay in the game even when you're exhausted. It's behind the urge to prove your value over and over, even after you've earned your place. It's what keeps you checking numbers, likes, feedback, validation, anything to confirm you still count. You're not chasing relevance because you're vain. You're chasing it because you're scared of being left behind. Maybe it started when someone younger was promoted over you, or when you realized your ideas didn't get the same applause they used to, Or when the pace of the world shifted and you weren't sure how to keep up. Suddenly, your worth doesn't feel secure, it feels conditional. Conditional on your output, your image, your ability to stay interesting, useful, seen. You start overcommitting, overproducing, oversharing. You say yes when you're depleted. You try to reinvent yourself constantly, not out of curiosity, but out of desperation. You feel like you're in a race where the finish line keeps moving and the rules keep changing. You're afraid to pause because stillness feels like obsolescence. Like the minute you rest, the world will forget your name. Fear of irrelevance doesn't just drain your energy, it corrodes your authenticity. You become what you think people want, not who you actually are. You chase trends instead of truth. You mimic rather than lead. You abandon your original voice just to stay in the room. And the more you contort to stay visible, the more disconnected you feel from the version of you that once had something real to say. And the cruel irony? The more you fear fading, the more you fade into something hollow, performative, forgettable. Because relevance isn't sustained by noise or speed, it's sustained by depth. But when you're terrified of disappearing, depth feels like a luxury you no longer have time for. Chronic reinvention disorder. Chronic reinvention disorder is the compulsive need to constantly start over, not out of growth, but out of fear of being seen too clearly, too consistently, or too deeply. It's the pattern of abandoning paths, projects, personas the moment they gain traction. You pivot just as things begin to work. You rebrand before anyone gets too familiar. You burn down your progress under the guise of evolution, but what you're really doing is running. You're not addicted to change, you're addicted to escape. You call it following your passion, listening to your gut, or outgrowing something. But deep down, there's a terror in what consistency might expose, because if you stick with one thing long enough, people might start to have expectations. You might have to own your power. You might actually succeed, and then what? With every reinvention, there's a high, a sense of possibility, a rush of potential. You get to be a mystery again. You get to create without comparison, without pressure. You get to reset. But eventually, the novelty fades and the discomfort creeps in. The need to commit, to follow through, to be known. And just as that moment arrives, you're already eyeing the next version of you. This cycle is seductive. Reinvention looks like courage. It gets praised. It feels like freedom. But what you're really doing is avoiding the vulnerability of sticking with something long enough for it to reflect the real you. You fear permanence because you fear being judged for the version that lasts. You keep shifting identities so no one can hold you to any one truth. And the tragedy is, you're brilliant, you're multifaceted, but you scatter your power across 1,000 beginnings, terrified of ever letting one version of you fully unfold. So your potential stays in preview mode, flashing glimpses of greatness that never get the chance to root. Chronic reinvention disorder isn't expansion, it's evasion. It's the fear that if you ever stop changing, you'll be stuck. But what you can't see is that sometimes staying the course isn't confinement, it's transformation, the kind that only reveals itself when you're willing to be seen in the same skin long enough to become something real. Blame deflection. Blame deflection is the unconscious art of protecting your ego at the cost of your growth. It's the subtle, automatic habit of pointing outward when things go wrong, blaming timing, circumstances, other people, bad luck, the system, anything but yourself. You may not even realize you're doing it. You're not trying to escape accountability. You're trying to escape the crushing weight of what it would mean if you were the problem. Blame deflection doesn't always look defensive. Sometimes it looks rational, logical, even polite. You explain, deflect, rationalize, soften. You tell yourself, I tried my best. They didn't communicate clearly. This just wasn't the right opportunity. And maybe all of that is true, but beneath the surface is a deeper avoidance, the fear of facing your own reflection. Because if you're to blame, then what does that say about you? That you're flawed, lazy, not good enough, that you missed your shot, that maybe, just maybe, you got in your own way? That truth is too heavy to hold, so you hand it off to someone else. This reflex is often learned. Maybe you were punished harshly for mistakes growing up. Maybe admitting fault meant emotional shame, humiliation, or rejection. So now, even small accountability feels dangerous. It threatens your sense of safety, of control, of self-respect. So you protect yourself, not by lying, but by redirecting the light, away from the wound, away from you. But blame deflection doesn't just prevent you from owning mistakes, it keeps you from evolving. If it's always someone else's fault, you never have to look inward, never have to change, never have to admit that sometimes the hardest part of the problem is you. So you stay stuck in the same loops, thinking life is just unfair, people just don't get you, opportunities just keep slipping away. The worst part, deep down, you do know. You feel the shame of it. You feel the disconnect between who you pretend to be and who you are. And the more you deflect, the harder it becomes to look yourself in the eye. But blame deflection doesn't protect you from judgment. It just delays your healing. And while it might save your pride in the short term, it costs you your power in the long run. Because the truth is, you can't change what you won't claim. Compromise compulsion. Compromise compulsion is the relentless need to negotiate your truth away before anyone even asks you to. It's the instinct to shrink, adjust, soften, or split the difference, just in case. You bend your desires, your standards, your voice, not out of agreement, but out of fear that standing fully in what you want will make you selfish, difficult, or alone. You cut yourself down into a more acceptable version before the world even gets a chance to reject the real one. You say, it's fine, when it's not. You agree to meet in the middle, even when that middle slices through your boundaries. You rationalize, I don't want to seem inflexible, but what you're really afraid of is being too much. So you give in. So you stay quiet. So you tolerate. It's not generosity, it's survival. Somewhere in your past, you learned that harmony is safer than honesty, that belonging means compromise, that asking for what you really want is a risk you can't afford. So now, every decision becomes a negotiation between what you need and what you think others can handle. And most of the time, you're the one who loses. You pride yourself on being easygoing, but it's not ease, it's erasure. You become the peacemaker, the adapter, the one who can handle it until you're carrying the emotional weight of everyone else's comfort. But inside, a quiet resentment brews, because every compromise you didn't really want becomes a wound, and over time, that wound turns into disconnection from others, from your path, from yourself. Compromise compulsion teaches you to anticipate rejection and meet it halfway. You give up pieces of your voice, your standards, your joy, so no one has to feel threatened by your fullness. But eventually, you forget what it even feels like to take up space unapologetically. You don't just avoid conflict, you avoid clarity. You don't just fear being wrong, you fear being whole. And the world doesn't see the sacrifices. It sees the version of you that always adjusts, that always smiles, that always says yes, until one day, the part of you that's been giving everything quietly breaks, and you realize no one ever asked you to compromise. You just never believed you were allowed not to. Over-identification with struggle. Over-identification with struggle is the quiet addiction to being the fighter, the survivor, the one who always has to overcome. It's the emotional identity you build around hardship until pain doesn't just happen to you, it defines you. You don't just experience struggle, you become it. And without it, you're not sure who you are. This sabotage is dangerous because it feels noble. People admire your grit. They respect your resilience. You've always been the one who could handle the hard things, the one who never quit, the one who kept showing up when life hit the hardest. and you wear that struggle like armor, like a badge, like proof that you are strong, worthy, real, but secretly, it's exhausting, because somewhere deep down, you've come to believe that if it's not hard, it doesn't count, that if you don't suffer for it, you haven't earned it. That ease is for other people, the lucky ones, the soft ones, the ones who haven't lived what you've lived. So you create friction, you choose the longer path, you turn down help, you carry burdens alone, even when relief is available, not because you want to suffer, but because you don't know how not to. Peace feels uncomfortable, support feels suspicious, success feels empty if it didn't break you first. You start identifying more with your wounds than you're healing. You bond with others through shared pain instead of shared possibility. You tell the same stories over and over, the ones where you survived, not the ones where you thrived. You fear that if you stop struggling, people will forget what you've been through, or worse, that you'll forget too, and lose the only version of yourself you've ever trusted. And here's the hardest truth. Some part of you is terrified to get better, because getting better means letting go. Letting go of the struggle means letting go of the identity that's protected you, defined you, validated you. It means asking a terrifying question: who am I without the pain? Over-identification with struggle doesn't make you more real. It just makes you stay small, because as long as pain is your proof of worth, you'll keep bleeding just to feel alive. Contingency, dependence. Contingency, dependence is the psychological leash you put on your own freedom, tying every desire, decision, and dream to a condition that must be met first. You don't let yourself act now. You wait. I'll launch once I have more experience. I'll rest after I finish everything. I'll speak up when I'm more confident. I'll be happy when I'm finally out of this phase. You dangle your life in front of yourself like a carrot you never quite reach. On the surface, it seems logical, strategic, even mature. You tell yourself it's not the right time, that you need one more piece in place before you can begin. But the truth is darker. You've made your peace, your power, your permission conditional. You've built a life on if-then statements, and that then never comes. This sabotage feels safe because it puts your risk on hold. You don't have to fail or be judged or feel exposed because technically you haven't started yet. You've convinced yourself that waiting is wise, that holding off is responsible, but really it's fear wearing a mask of logic. Fear that if you act now without all the boxes checked, you might finally see what you're truly capable of and have no more excuses left to hide behind. Contingency dependence often forms when self-worth was tied to achievement, when love came after performance, when safety came only after sacrifice. So now, joy feels undeserved unless it's earned. Rest feels indulgent unless it's productive. Action feels reckless unless it's proven. You've made thriving something you must qualify for, and so your entire life gets deferred. You become a master at setting just one more goalpost, one more milestone, one more condition. You tell yourself you're being intentional, but all you're doing is delaying your own arrival. Your real life gets paused, waiting for circumstances to feel perfect enough to deserve it. But here's the truth. The starting line doesn't move. You do. And until you're willing to claim what you want before everything is guaranteed, you'll stay trapped in a loop of waiting for readiness, for permission, for a moment that only exists on the other side of action. Self-invalidation. Self-invalidation is the cruel, internal habit of rejecting your own emotions, needs, and experiences before anyone else can. It's the voice inside that says, "You're overreacting. You're too sensitive. It wasn't that bad. You should be fine by now." It's not just self-doubt, it's self-erasure, a constant undermining of your own reality, as if what you feel only matters if someone else agrees with it. This pattern often begins early, when your pain was met with discomfort, dismissal, or silence. Maybe you learned to laugh off hurt feelings to avoid being called dramatic. Maybe you were praised for being the easy child, So you learned to minimize your needs to stay lovable. Over time, you started doing it automatically. You buried the anger. You brushed off the sadness. You explained away your joy. You made yourself easy to digest, even if it meant disappearing in the process. Now, whenever an emotion rises, your first instinct is to judge it, to analyze it, to find a reason it's not valid. You don't cry without guilt. You don't celebrate without justification. You seek permission to feel something, anything, as if your inner world is always on trial. And even when you do open up, you follow it with a qualifier. But I know other people have it worse. Self-invalidation makes you second-guess your gut. It keeps you in toxic situations because you convince yourself you're just being too sensitive. It silences your voice in conversations, meetings, relationships, because some part of you has decided your truth isn't solid enough to stand on its own. You edit yourself in real time, shrinking your emotions to fit what's reasonable. You become your own gaslighter, your own gatekeeper, your own oppressor. And the tragedy? No one sees it. From the outside, you seem strong, logical, grounded. But inside, you're starving for the basic right to feel. You want to scream, to cry, to say this hurt me, without having to prove that it did. Self-invalidation doesn't protect you from shame. It is shame. It's what happens when you've learned that your needs are inconvenient, your emotions are flawed, and your truth is negotiable. So you silence yourself, not because no one's listening, but because you've forgotten that you were ever worth hearing. Achievement, rejection. Achievement rejection is the self-sabotaging reflex to emotionally detach from your wins the moment they arrive. It's when you hit the goal, receive the praise, accomplish what you set out to do, and immediately feel numb, undeserving, or even embarrassed. You minimize it, ignore it, or quietly dismiss it like it never mattered in the first place. It's not humility. It's not modesty. It's the inability to let success land. This isn't because the win wasn't meaningful. It's because part of you believes you weren't supposed to have it. That success, for you, is a fluke. That recognition is a misunderstanding. That happiness is temporary, dangerous, unearned. So the moment achievement shows up, you start preparing for it to disappear. You tell yourself it wasn't that big of a deal, that the timing was lucky, that you could have done better. You find ways to taint it so it doesn't feel so threatening. Somewhere in your story, you learn that celebration was unsafe. Maybe you were taught not to brag. Maybe you were punished for shining. Maybe the last time you let yourself feel proud, someone cut you down, and you learned to protect yourself by disconnecting. So now, when the spotlight hits, you shrink, you flinch, you disappear behind a wall of self-doubt before anyone else gets the chance to tear you down. Achievement rejection keeps you in a cycle where effort is praised, but success is disowned. You become addicted to the climb, but allergic to the summit. You work harder, chase more, build faster, not out of hunger for more, but out of an inability to receive what you already have. Because once you get it, you don't know what to do with it. You start to resent your own ambition. You begin asking yourself what the point of it all was. You crave validation but reject it when it comes. You fear that if you acknowledge your success, you'll either lose it or worse, be exposed as someone who never deserved it. So you stay hungry but never full, always building, never arriving, always proving, never believing, because somewhere deep inside, the win feels like a lie. And rejecting it feels safer than finally accepting that you were worthy of it all along. Emotional outsourcing. Emotional outsourcing is the unconscious habit of handing your feelings over to someone else, waiting for them to decide how you're allowed to feel. It's when you look to others for your emotional cues. Am I okay? Was that rude? Should I feel hurt, proud, embarrassed, excited? You outsource your validation, your confidence, your peace. Not because you don't have feelings, but because you don't fully trust them unless someone else approves. It starts early, often in environments where emotions weren't safe. Maybe you were told you were too sensitive, too dramatic, or overreacting. Maybe your joy was met with indifference, or your pain was minimized. So now, you second-guess everything. You don't cry unless someone else agrees it's a big deal. You don't celebrate until someone else says you deserve it. You hold your anger in until someone else gives you permission to be upset. And it's subtle. You become the person who says, "Do you think I'm overthinking this? Is it okay if I feel this way?" You ask for feedback on your emotions like they're up for negotiation. You wait for your friends to confirm that yes, this should have hurt you, or yes, this was unfair, because without that confirmation, you don't feel entitled to your own emotional truth. This kind of self-abandonment runs deep. You're not just asking for support, you're asking for permission to feel. You don't let your emotions be real until someone else co-signs them. And when they don't, you doubt yourself, you shame yourself, you gaslight yourself into silence. The more you outsource, the further you drift from your own emotional compass. You don't just feel disconnected, you feel counterfeit. Emotional outsourcing is a slow erosion of self-trust. It leaves you emotionally dependent, reactive, and fragile because your sense of reality is always in someone else's hands. And when they don't respond how you hoped, you collapse. Not because their response was so powerful, but because you gave it all the power. Until you reclaim your right to feel what you feel without needing proof, permission, or consensus, you'll keep waiting for someone else to validate your inner world while abandoning it yourself. Control addiction. Control addiction is the compulsive need to manage, predict, and orchestrate everything because letting go feels like chaos, and chaos feels like danger. It's not about being organized or responsible. It's about survival, about gripping life so tightly that spontaneity becomes a threat, trust becomes weakness, and surrender feels like death. This kind of addiction is invisible to most. It's praised in a world that mistakes hyper-independence for strength. You look like the reliable one, the leader, the one who always has a plan, always keeps it together. But behind the competence is a suffocating fear. If I'm not in control, I'm not safe. Maybe you grew up in an unstable environment where unpredictability caused pain, where adults were unreliable, emotions were volatile, or love was conditional. So you learned to control everything you could, your behavior, your achievements, your image, your emotions. Now, as an adult, you feel anxiety not because something is wrong, but because you don't know what's coming next. You try to control people's perceptions of you, anticipating how they'll react before they even speak. You micromanage outcomes, relationships, timing, language. You struggle to delegate. You over-explain, over-prepare, and secretly panic when plans change. Not because you're high-strung, but because unpredictability makes you feel exposed, helpless, at risk. And yet no matter how tightly you grip, it's never enough. Control is an illusion that requires constant maintenance. You don't rest, you monitor, you don't trust, you calculate. You can't enjoy the moment because you're already rehearsing how to prevent the next crisis. You feel safest when you're 10 steps ahead, even if it means never actually arriving where you are. But the cost? Intimacy suffers, creativity suffers, joy becomes conditional, life shrinks to the size of what you can manage. You push people away with your need to handle it, all while silently screaming for help. And when things do fall apart, because they always do, it's not just pain you feel, it's shame. Shame for not having prevented it. Shame for not being in control. Control addiction doesn't come from power. It comes from trauma, from the deep belief that the world won't catch you if you fall. So you build your own net, carry your own weight, and call it strength, when what it really is fear wrapped in structure. Catastrophizing is the mental habit of fast-forwarding to the worst-case scenario, instantly and instinctively. It's turning a single setback into a full-blown disaster in your mind. A delayed text becomes abandonment. A critical comment becomes proof that you're worthless. A missed opportunity becomes the end of your future. You don't just anticipate trouble, you live in it before it even happens. Your brain doesn't ask, what if it works out? It asks, what if it all burns down? And once that story starts playing, it takes over. Your nervous system doesn't know the difference between imagination and reality, so your body goes into battle mode, heart racing, chest tight, mind spiraling, all because of something that hasn't happened and likely never will. This sabotage doesn't come from nowhere. It often forms in environments where bad things happen without warning, where things went wrong suddenly, painfully, or without explanation. So now, your mind tries to outsmart pain by preparing for it. If I can imagine the worst, it thinks, maybe it won't hurt as much when it happens. But in trying to avoid pain, you end up living inside it every day. Catastrophizing feels like control, like vigilance, like being realistic. But it's not. It's emotional time travel to a reality that doesn't exist. It robs you of presence. It steals your sleep, your peace, your ability to think clearly. You start reacting to imaginary fires, while the real moment, often calm, manageable, or even beautiful, passes you by. And the saddest part? Catastrophizing doesn't make you safer. It just makes you scared. It doesn't protect you from loss. It makes you grieve things you haven't even lost. It doesn't build resilience. It depletes it, because every imagined failure leaves a scar that your body can't distinguish from real trauma. You begin to trust fear more than fact. You start believing your panic instead of your truth, and soon the possibility of good things begins to feel suspicious, too good to be true, just a setup for the next crash. So you brace for impact, again and again, living in the wreckage of a future that never came. Rumination. Rumination is the mental prison where your mind plays the same painful loop on repeat, an endless, obsessive replay of past conversations, mistakes, regrets, and what-ifs. You don't just remember something, you relive it over and over. You dissect it from every angle, searching for meaning, for closure, for control. But instead of finding clarity, you dig yourself deeper into emotional quicksand. This isn't reflection. It's not growth. It's mental self-harm disguised as problem solving. You tell yourself you're just being thorough, just trying to understand. But what you're really doing is punishing yourself with your own memory. You can't let it go because letting go feels like permission. And some part of you believes you don't deserve that permission yet. Maybe you keep replaying what you said, analyzing every word, wishing you could go back and edit yourself. Maybe it's something someone did to you, something unresolved, unfair, unforgiven. You tell yourself that if you just think about it long enough, it'll make sense, that you'll finally feel at peace. But peace never comes, just more doubt, more anxiety, more self-blame. Rumination is exhausting because it feels productive. It mimics introspection. You believe you're getting somewhere, but in truth, you're just circling the same emotional drain. You spiral through scenarios that never change. You create entire conversations that never happen. You rehearse anger, heartbreak, or humiliation like they're happening right now, because to your nervous system, they are. It robs you of presence, of sleep, of joy. You can't focus. You can't move on. You can't be here because your mind is stuck back there. And the worst part, the longer you ruminate, the more distorted the memory becomes, the more blame you carry, the more shame you absorb, until you're no longer just remembering pain. You're building your identity around it. Rumination isn't reflection. It's resistance. Resistance to closure, resistance to self-compassion, resistance to forgiving others or yourself. It's a way of holding on to control in the one place you still can, your mind, even if it's tearing you apart from the inside out, because somehow staying in the pain feels safer than facing the terrifying truth that it's time to let go. All or nothing thinking. All or nothing thinking is the mental trap that convinces you life only happens in extremes. If it's not perfect, it's a failure. If you're not the best, you're nothing. If today wasn't productive, then you're lazy. There's no middle, no nuance, no grace, just total success or total defeat. And once you fall short of ideal, even by an inch, the shame floods in and tells you to quit, to burn it all down, to start over later when you can finally get it right. This sabotage doesn't just impact what you do, it distorts how you see. You don't miss a workout, you ruin your progress. You don't make a mistake, you become a mistake. You don't have a hard day, you declare that you're broken. It's emotional whiplash, always swinging between too much and not enough, never pausing in the space where real life actually lives, in the in-between. It often begins in childhood, where love and praise may have felt conditional, where you were rewarded for getting it right and quietly ignored or shamed when you didn't. So you learn to attach your worth to achievement, to control, to image. You internalize the message, if I can't be the best, I don't deserve to be seen. All or nothing thinking turns your goals into prisons. You either follow the plan perfectly or abandon it entirely. You either succeed quickly or convince yourself you never had what it takes. And in this pattern, nothing is sustainable. You burn out trying to be everything, or you shut down because you fear being anything less. The tragedy is, this mindset kills progress, not because you can't move forward, but because the moment things go off script, you decide it's over. You mistake a detour for a dead end. You throw away entire efforts because one moment didn't look like the fantasy in your head. You demand perfection from yourself, and when you don't deliver it, you punish yourself with paralysis. All or nothing thinking doesn't push you toward greatness. It pulls you away from reality, from consistency, from compassion, and in the process, it steals the one thing you need most to truly grow, permission to be imperfect and still keep going. Minimizing achievements. Minimizing achievements is the quiet act of shrinking your success the moment it shows up, turning milestones into footnotes, brilliance into background noise. It's brushing off a compliment with a laugh. It's saying it wasn't a big deal when it absolutely was. It's reaching the goal you once dreamed of and immediately moving the bar higher, without pause, without celebration, without pride. Because somewhere deep down, you don't feel like you've earned the right to feel proud. You tell yourself you're just being humble, that you don't want to seem arrogant, that it's not that serious. But what you're really doing is hiding from the discomfort of recognition, hiding from the responsibility that comes with being excellent, hiding from the terrifying possibility that you are enough and always have been. This sabotage often begins with early conditioning. Maybe you were taught not to brag, maybe your wins were ignored, or someone else made you feel guilty for outshining them. Maybe you started to believe that pride was dangerous, that joy had to be earned through suffering, and that downplaying your value was the safest way to belong. So now you keep your success quiet, polished, digestible. You achieve something meaningful and immediately point out what you could have done better. You receive praise and respond with discomfort, sarcasm, or deflection. You hit a major goal and tell yourself it was luck, timing, or that anyone could have done it. You don't give yourself credit, not because you didn't do the work, but because you're afraid to own it. And what's worse, the world listens. When you downplay your power, people stop seeing it. When you act like your success is nothing, they start to treat it like nothing. Over time, your reality becomes one where your light feels invisible, not because it isn't bright, but because you keep dimming it before anyone can notice. Minimizing achievements is not humility, it's self-protection. It's fear of standing out, fear of being envied, fear of being asked to do it again. But in silencing your victories, you start to believe they weren't worth much in the first place. And eventually, you stop chasing them, not because you can't achieve more, but because you no longer believe it matters when you do. Self-doubt loops. Self-doubt loops are the relentless mental spirals that keep you trapped in a cycle of second-guessing, overthinking, and emotional paralysis. It's the inner voice that never shuts up, constantly poking holes in your ideas, your talents, your worth. You take one step forward, then question everything. Was it good enough? Was that the right choice? Did I mess it up? And before you can act again, you're already doubting the action you haven't even taken yet. This loop doesn't just whisper insecurity, it amplifies it. One small thought turns into a flood of imagined failures. You don't just worry you're not ready, you convince yourself you never will be. You don't just hesitate, you rehearse every possible way it could go wrong until the fear feels realer than your potential. What makes self-doubt loops so vicious is that they feed on your intelligence. You're reflective, analytical, thoughtful, which makes the spiral feel reasonable, logical, like you're just being cautious. But deep down, it's not wisdom you're chasing, it's permission. You want to feel sure before you act, before you speak, before you let yourself believe you're enough. And in waiting for that certainty, you never move. This sabotage often grows from early experiences where your confidence was broken. Maybe you were ridiculed for being wrong. Maybe you succeeded and still weren't praised. Maybe every risk you took was met with silence or criticism. So now, doubt becomes your default. You think if you tear yourself apart first, no one else can. If you're always questioning, you'll never be surprised by failure. But self-doubt loops don't keep you safe. They keep you small. They eat your time, your energy, your voice. They convince you to keep rewriting, rechecking, rethinking until the moment has passed. And then you use that missed moment as more evidence that you're not ready. The loop tightens. The spiral deepens. You don't lack ability. You lack trust in yourself, in your instincts, in the idea that you're allowed to try before you're absolutely certain. Until you break the loop, you'll stay stuck in preparation, perfectionism, and fear, watching your life from the sidelines, always wondering what might have happened. If only you'd believed. Fear of disappointing others. Fear of disappointing others is the invisible leash that keeps you tethered to versions of yourself you've long outgrown. It's the tightness in your chest when you even consider saying no, changing your mind, or putting yourself first. It's the need to manage expectations at the cost of your freedom, joy, and truth. You live in a constant state of emotional negotiation, trying to preserve harmony while quietly losing pieces of yourself in the process. You say yes when you're depleted. You take the call when you want silence. You show up when you desperately need to rest, not because you want to, but because the thought of someone being upset, let down, or even slightly uncomfortable around you feels unbearable. Their disappointment becomes your shame. Their discomfort becomes your emergency. You become the fixer, the peacekeeper, the overgiver. You tiptoe through life trying not to upset the fragile balance of other people's feelings. And when you can't meet their unspoken expectations, you spiral. You explain, you apologize, you overcompensate, because somewhere deep inside, you believe that being liked is a requirement for being safe. This fear often forms in childhood, when love felt conditional, when approval had to be earned, when mistakes made you feel like a burden instead of a person. And now you carry that weight into every relationship. You feel responsible not just for your actions, but for their reactions. So you contort, you overthink, you abandon your needs just to avoid the ache of imagined rejection. But the cost is heavy. You start to resent the people you bend for. You feel trapped in a life that looks kind on the outside, but feels like quiet suffocation on the inside. And worst of all, the person you fear disappointing most becomes yourself. Fear of disappointing others is a cage you build with good intentions and keep locked with guilt. You think you're being generous, loyal, dependable, but what you're really doing is betraying your own boundaries again and again, hoping someone will thank you for it, but they don't, because they never asked you to disappear for their comfort. You just thought you had to. Over-apologizing is the chronic automatic habit of saying I'm sorry for existing. of shrinking yourself preemptively, as if your presence, your needs, your opinions are inconveniences the world has to tolerate. It's not just a verbal tic, it's a deep-rooted reflex that comes from believing you are a disruption, not a contribution. You apologize when someone bumps into you. You apologize for speaking, for taking up space, for expressing emotion, for needing help. You apologize for things you didn't cause, can't control, or shouldn't even feel bad about. And each time you say it, what you're really saying is, please don't be mad at me for being here. This isn't politeness. This is fear of rejection, of conflict, of being misunderstood or judged. Somewhere in your story, you learned that keeping the peace was your job, that the way to stay safe was to stay small. So you started softening every interaction with apology. You used it to make yourself smaller than your truth. You used it to earn belonging through self-erasure. But over-apologizing doesn't make you easier to love. It makes you harder to see. It trains the world to expect your silence, your sacrifice, your self-blame. People stop noticing your boundaries because you've already surrendered them in advance. People stop hearing your voice because it arrives buried under guilt that doesn't belong to you. Over time, the habit becomes identity. You don't just say sorry, you feel sorry for wanting more, for asking questions, for not being perfect, for taking a breath too loudly in a room that never taught you you were allowed to exist without permission. And the cost? You disconnect from your own power. You teach yourself not to trust your impact. You learn to soften every edge until you vanish inside your own niceness. You apologize until no one remembers who you were before you started explaining yourself away. But here's the truth. You don't owe an apology for taking up space. You don't need to say sorry for your truth. Not every step you take requires a disclaimer, and the people who love you fully won't need you to shrink in order to stay. Assuming negative intent. Assuming negative intent is the reflexive belief that others are out to hurt, reject, or diminish you, even when there's no clear evidence they are. It's the knee-jerk reaction that turns silence into disdain, a short reply into passive aggression, a missed call into abandonment. You don't just anticipate the worst, you assign it. You fill in the blanks with betrayal before they've even written the ending. This mindset doesn't scream, it whispers. They didn't reply because they're done with me. That compliment was probably fake. They looked annoyed. Did I say something wrong? And once that seed is planted, your nervous system spirals, your body prepares for conflict, your heart braces for rejection, your mind runs scenarios like a defense attorney, building a case that hasn't even been filed. The painful irony? You're not looking for a fight, you're looking for safety. You assume malice because you've been blindsided before. You learn that kindness can come with strings, that love can disappear without warning, that people say one thing and mean another. So now, assuming the worst feels like armor. If you expect to be hurt, maybe it won't sting as much when it happens. But this mental habit doesn't protect you, it poisons you. It erodes connection before it can even begin. You misread intentions, withdraw preemptively, and interpret neutrality as threat. You become so busy managing imagined harm that you forget how to receive real care. The more you assume others are against you, the more guarded, cold, and disconnected you become, and the more your fear starts to create the very outcomes you're trying to avoid. It's a cycle of quiet sabotage. People feel your suspicion, your defensiveness, your walls, and they start to mirror it. They pull back, they hesitate. They don't know how to reach someone who's already decided they're the enemy. Assuming negative intent doesn't make you strong, it makes you tired. It keeps you trapped in old wounds, replaying past pain like it's prophecy. And until you question those assumptions, until you learn to leave space for kindness, misunderstanding, or even neutrality, you'll keep bleeding in relationships that never actually cut you. Procrastination. Procrastination is the quiet rebellion of a nervous system overwhelmed by pressure, fear, or unmet emotional needs. It's not laziness. It's not a lack of willpower. It's a form of self-protection, your mind's desperate attempt to delay what feels too heavy, too risky, too exposing. You put off the task, not because it doesn't matter, but because it matters too much, and failing at it feels like it would crush you. You don't just delay, you carry the weight of delay. You think about it constantly, criticize yourself for avoiding it, promise to start tomorrow, and yet, when tomorrow comes, the cycle repeats. You scroll, you snack, you clean, you escape into anything but that thing, and all the while, shame builds, thick, heavy, suffocating, not because you didn't do it, but because you wanted to, and still didn't. Procrastination is often born from perfectionism. If you can't do it flawlessly, why do it at all? So you wait for the perfect moment, the perfect plan, the perfect mental state, but it never arrives, and your sense of worth becomes entangled in the task that remains undone. Eventually, you don't even fear the task itself. You fear what it says about you. You begin to believe you're broken, irresponsible, behind. It gets worse when you finally do the thing and realize it didn't take that long, that it wasn't as hard as you made it, that you could have done it days or weeks ago, and that realization deepens the shame. So the next time, you hesitate again, not because you can't do it, but because you're trying to outrun the feeling of failure that now starts before the task even begins. You tell yourself you'll work better under pressure, but that pressure is self-inflicted. You've wired your motivation to come only after guilt reaches a boiling point, and while you may eventually pull it off, the emotional toll is steep. You live in a constant state of low-level dread, always behind, always apologizing, always bracing for the consequences of your own delay. Procrastination isn't the problem, it's the symptom of fear, of overwhelm, of buried self-doubt. You don't need to get more disciplined. You need to ask, what am I protecting myself from by not starting? Because until you answer that, the cycle will keep spinning, and so will you. Self-censorship. Self-censorship is the silent suppression of your truth before it even has the chance to breathe. It's not someone silencing you. It's you deciding, in a split-second calculation, that what you feel, think, or want to say is too risky to share, too intense, too needy, too weird, too much. So you edit, you dilute, you hold back. Not because you don't have something to say, but because you've convinced yourself it's safer to stay quiet. You rehearse a sentence and then swallow it. You write the message and delete it. You soften your opinions, downplay your pain, laugh at things that hurt, and avoid anything that might stir the waters. You become fluent in invisibility, perfectly agreeable, always fine, endlessly adaptable. You wear the mask so well, most people don't even notice you're hiding. This sabotage often stems from early moments where being real came at a cost. Maybe your voice was punished. Maybe your emotions were too big for the room. Maybe you were taught, directly or indirectly, that your truth made people uncomfortable. So now you flinch before you speak. You hesitate before you show. You scan every interaction for the safest version of yourself to present. And in doing so, you disappear. Self-censorship doesn't protect your relationships. It protects your image at the expense of intimacy. People love the version of you that's curated, controlled, careful. But deep down, you start to feel lonely, misunderstood, muted, because no one can truly see you if you never show up in full. And the silence becomes a prison. You start to wonder why your needs aren't met, why your opinions don't matter, why you feel so distant in rooms full of people. But how can you be met if you've never let yourself arrive? Self-censorship isn't politeness. It's self-abandonment, rehearsed into habit. A quiet betrayal, repeated so many times it becomes your default. You think you're keeping the peace, but really you're trading authenticity for acceptance. And eventually, that trade becomes unbearable because no external approval will ever fill the silence of your silenced self. Indecision masked as caution. Indecision masked as caution is the mental sleight of hand that convinces you you're being wise, responsible, thoughtful, when really you're just afraid to choose. You call it patience, you call it discernment, but underneath the analysis and weighing of options is a deep fear of regret, judgment, or failure. So you don't move. You stay in the middle, you live in limbo, endlessly preparing for a decision you never actually make. You tell yourself you're just waiting for more clarity, more signs, more certainty. But the truth is, you're waiting for the fear to disappear, and it won't. You want a guarantee that doesn't exist, a version of the future where no risk backfires, where no door shuts permanently, where no one gets disappointed. And since that level of safety can't be found, you cling to indecision like a shield. If you never commit, you never have to be wrong. This sabotage feels sophisticated. You may even be praised for it, seen as methodical, deliberate, mature. But inside, it's not peace you feel, it's pressure. Every day that passes without movement compounds your anxiety. The longer you wait, the more your options weigh on you. And slowly, what began as caution becomes paralysis. Indecision isn't neutral. It's exhausting. It steals your energy, your focus, your self-trust. You rehearse every outcome. You second-guess every instinct. You fear missing out and making the wrong call. So you keep researching, asking others, making pro-con lists, secretly hoping someone will make the decision for you. And maybe, in your past, choosing did lead to pain. Maybe you've made bold choices before and been punished for them. So now, you avoid choosing altogether, thinking safety lives in the in-between. But indecision has its own consequences. Time slips away, momentum dies, opportunities dissolve, not because you failed, but because you hesitated too long to begin. Indecision masked as caution is a trap, a comfortable cage. It looks responsible from the outside, but inside, it's just fear, dressed in logic, hiding from the truth that sometimes courage isn't the absence of risk. It's the willingness to decide without certainty and trust yourself enough to handle whatever follows. Avoidance, disguised as focus. Avoidance disguised as focus is the clever trick your mind plays when it wants to run, but still look productive doing it. It's when you obsess over small tasks, organize your schedule down to the minute, pour energy into the safe projects, and chase busyness like its purpose. You look driven, engaged, disciplined, but beneath the surface, you're hiding from the real work, from the emotional risk, from the thing that actually matters. You convince yourself you're making progress. You say things like, I just need to finish this first, or I'm not ready to start the big thing yet, or I need to stay focused on what's already in motion. And sure, you're focused, but only on what keeps you from facing the edge where discomfort lives, where growth happens, where fear meets purpose. This sabotage is sneaky because it gets praise. You seem responsible, you're busy, you're getting things done, but deep down, you feel the weight of misalignment, that quiet restlessness, that sense that something important is being avoided, not because you're lazy, but because you're scared of failing, scared of succeeding, scared of being seen. So instead, you stay locked in a loop of low-stakes productivity. You answer every email but never pitch the idea. You perfect the website but never share your voice. You optimize everything around you while the bold, terrifying dream sits untouched in the background, haunting you. You tell yourself you're building toward it, but in truth, you're orbiting around it. Constant motion, no real ignition. Avoidance disguised as focus doesn't stop your life. It clutters it with effort that feels important but leaves you unfulfilled, with checklists that grow longer while your dreams grow quieter. You're not stuck because you don't have time. You're stuck because you're devoting your time to things that keep you just safe enough. And the cost? You forget what it feels like to be alive in your work, to feel terror and excitement in the same breath, to move towards something that actually scares you, because that's where the real magic is, and you know it. That's why you keep circling, not because you can't see the path, but because it's exactly where you're afraid to go. Fear of failure is the invisible chain that keeps your potential locked in place, not because you don't have the talent, the drive, or the vision, but because you've tied your worth to the outcome. It's not just fear of falling short, it's fear of being exposed, fear that if you try and don't succeed, it will confirm every doubt you've ever carried about yourself, that you're not good enough, that you're a fraud, that everyone will finally see you were never really capable. So you stay in planning mode. You become a perfectionist, a procrastinator. You tinker with details, delay the launch, endlessly revise your vision, not because you're improving it, but because as long as it's unfinished, it can't be judged. As long as you never really try, no one can say you truly failed, and neither can you. This fear is often rooted in early wounds, places where mistakes were punished, where love felt conditional, where excellence was the only thing that kept you safe. So now, you carry the belief that failure isn't just feedback, it's fatal, a verdict, a public humiliation you won't recover from. You brace for that impact before it ever happens, and in doing so, you reject your dreams before anyone else gets the chance. Fear of failure is brutal because it wears so many disguises. I'm just not ready yet. I want to get it perfect. I'm still researching. I don't want to waste time. But what you're really saying is, I'm scared of what this might say about me if it doesn't work. So you protect your ego at the cost of your evolution. And the worst part, the longer you avoid failing, the more your fear grows. It becomes larger than the thing itself. You inflate the consequences in your mind until the idea of trying feels more terrifying than the pain of staying stuck. So you settle. You play it safe. You cheer for others while quietly wondering what it would feel like to believe in yourself enough to just try. But fear doesn't disappear with avoidance. It festers. And the dream doesn't die because it was impossible. It dies because you waited too long for certainty in a world where the only way forward is risk.